Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show, I should say our show, the best damn morning show that you can find that is doing news, politics, domestic, and international. That is what we do. That is why I am here to do the news, and I'm glad that you could join me to be here to do the news. There is a lot of big news, and more to the point of big news, a damn good show for you today. Alex Krainer is going to be here at 7:15. Ted Rall, he's going to be here at 8:15. A lot to talk about on the domestic front. And we are also going to have KJ No. He is a fan favorite and one of my favorites. I learn something every time KJ is here. Shout out to the chat who's here early. The chat was here like 5 something this morning. I will give myself credit this morning. I was on the ball. I was ready. I was up. I was at 'em, ready to do the news, set up the show, and everything else. So, yes, damn it, today I'm here on time, and I even got my coffee. Even got that. So I'm glad that you can join me on this episode. We are going to have a really good show. Donald Trump is in a trade war haphazardly, and he doesn't know how to get out. And not just not know how to get out, he has alienated so many people around the world that now he is looking for allies. Because what he realizes is, oh my God, we can't contain China. And not just that, China is serious about taking this to the bitter end. Now, what's fascinating about this is he's looking across the world for allies with the idea of, okay, maybe we can gang up on China by working with other countries in order to do that. Okay, well, how do you do that? You have articles saying the transatlantic relationship is broken. Donald Trump has effectively said we're going to take Greenland. We're going to make Canada the 51st state. They've called Europe vassals. Vance has gone over there and read them the Riot Act, literally talked to them like they were children. How do you do it? Many of these countries are looking to China. Greenland, apparently, is looking to forge relationships with China. Xi Jinping has been going around the world, Malaysia, Vietnam, solidifying his relationships with those countries. Russia, Iran are already part of BRICS, and they will also be arm in arm with China on this. If it is indeed now a zero sum is what Donald Trump wanted, a zero sum contest to the end is what Donald Trump will get. And he is asking, waiting, why don't they call? They're not calling. They're not calling. You don't get it. Tipping point. I know I keep using this term, but the term is apt. Canary in a coal mine. Ukraine was a canary in a coal mine in a military sense. All of the powers of NATO, with the US literally directing events on the ground, and they lose. And they lose. And not just lose badly. And if the war continues, it will be such a stunning, stinging loss that none of these people could say, well, it's a stalemate. I don't even know how they say it's a stalemate now. The Ukrainian military is running out of men. Russian military has like 1 million men military at this point. Russia went in with 150,000 people, took 20% of the territory with 150,000. What does 1 million do? Huh? What does that do? And they've been pushing on a 2,000-kilometer front. Kursk is nearly taken. I think there may be a hamlet left in Kursk. So that part, that fool's escapade is over with. The offensive that they were planning, that they even made promo videos for, has utterly and demonstratively failed. So now what? Joe Biden is out. Trump is in. And there's a question when the funding finally finishes. Will Trump re-up additional money for Ukraine? And the thought is, the answer may be most likely no. He has complete contempt for Zelensky. He doesn't like Zelensky. Putin has already said that no deal can be made with Zelensky in office. Zelensky has shown nothing but contempt for Putin going on CBS News. If anybody watches that CBS News interview with Zelensky and come away thinking that guy wants a deal, they're out of their mind. Out of their mind. How do you say I have 100% hatred for somebody, but I want to negotiate with that person? How do you do that? How do you do that? You don't do it. It's the answer to that question. They still have on the books that they can't negotiate with Russia by law. How do you do it? So this notion that Ukraine is now looking for nonsense, nonsense. Now Donald Trump has knocked down the money that he said Ukraine owed him from 300 billion to 100 billion. So there's that in regards to the mineral deal. But keep in mind that mineral deal is not a mineral deal. It's mineral deal in a way enhanced, or torture is enhanced interrogation. It is effectively control of pretty much everything. And if he signs it, you are effectively making Ukraine a colony. Also, with this is Witkoff. Witkoff is saying some pretty wild stuff. And what I mean by that is Witkoff is talking in Moscow, not necessarily about a deal for Ukraine. As I keep pointing out, if you have a conversation specifically about Ukraine, there's nothing really to talk about. Russia gave their proposal. These 4 regions are ours: Zaporozhye, Kherson, Lugansk, Donetsk. By law, under Russian law, they are ours. There's no negotiation on that front. No NATO for Ukraine ever. Meaning these things set in stone or the war continues. And change of government. Now, Witkoff has to kind of accept that. Well, Witkoff is going back with nothing to say. But what they are talking about is much larger than Ukraine. They are talking about a redefinition of the relationship between Russia and the United States in a way that reshapes the global order and settles conflicts, superpower conflicts between these countries going forward in perpetuity. And what's wild about this, they're doing this without including Europe. Meaning, what Putin was asking for in the very beginning before the war started, we need a new security architecture of Europe, is in part what Witkoff is talking about in the context, though, of these economic entanglements between these countries. Now, this is grand, this is very large, and as I say, Ukraine is only a part of the larger conversation in regards to what Witkoff is saying. Now, Witkoff might be out of his mind. Putin may be leading him down a garden path, maybe playing him. Who knows? But the reality of it is, what Witkoff is saying here is pretty astonishing. How long is this clip? Okay, 59 seconds. I'm going to play this clip from Sean Hannity. I will tell you, Europe is freaking out because what they are doing is they are establishing a relationship for Europe where Europe is not included in the details of that relationship. Basically, they're settling things between the US and Russia. Now, there is a fascinating question what this means for China, what this means for Iran, what this means for the ability for Russia to influence Iran in regards to any kind of deal. All of these things are also on the table, especially considering that Trump is in a trade war with China that he can't extricate himself from, and that Russia is a close ally or closer than allies of China. This is fascinating. This is Witkoff. This is what he was saying on Sean Hannity. Listen to what he says here, because again, this goes beyond just the issue of Ukraine.
Do you really see a deal emerging? Are you confident?
I think you used a very good word there, Sean, emerging. I do. This is the third meeting I've had with him. This last meeting lasted close to 5 hours. We had 2 of his key advisors in the room at the time, Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev. And it was a compelling meeting. And towards the end, we actually came up with, and I'm going to say finally, but I don't mean it in the way that we were waiting. I mean it in the way that it took a while for us to get to this place. What Putin's request is to have a permanent peace here. So beyond a ceasefire, we got an answer to that.
Permanent peace. Permanent peace. Now, keep in mind, this is what Putin wanted in the first place, right? When Putin was standing out there like a preacher, begging people to come to Jesus. Why do you think he was doing that? It wasn't because he wanted a war. It's because he wanted a security architecture of Europe where Russia would be safe and where they wouldn't necessarily have to fight a war. The war happened because Europe was being intransigent in the way that they were effectively dealing with them. And so this is not inconsistent with what Russia wanted in the first place. And any deal that Russia goes with and gets, they would want to have some kind of safety and diplomatic relations, some rapprochement, as they call it, with their neighbors and with the US, considering the US was the one that was effectively leading the war. So obviously, that's what they want. Witkoff is effectively saying, we are trying to get a settled peace. Europe is not part of these negotiations. And you can imagine that they are freaking out and doing any and everything in their power to undermine those negotiations. This is Rutt, NATO secretary. He's in Odessa, Ukraine, having a conversation. And what he's saying here is that the issue of NATO is still on the table. That for all intents and purposes, that we still may end up with Ukraine being in NATO, and we would figure that out after the peace is settled. So after a deal is made, then we will revisit this issue of NATO. Okay, well, obviously, this is a red line. And the only reason they will be saying stuff like this is if indeed their entire point is to put a kibosh on the deal because Russia is not going to accept those terms of this notion of we will now talk about NATO after we've established a peace. If that is the conversation, no deal. And I suspect that's why Mark doesn't believe that they would get a deal. Europe is freaking out. Europe is freaking out. How much time do I have? Okay, my guest is about to come on. The other thing is a trade war. The Washington Post pointed out that Donald Trump doesn't effectively know what he is doing. And he is in something that he can't extricate himself from. And if you read through the piece, it points out America needs allies and partners for what is shaping up as a protracted contest for geopolitical primacy. Now that Donald Trump has unleashed a trade war against China, there are a rush to take sides. So now he wants other countries to join in with him in this trade war, with this idea of, okay, now that we're in this, we effectively need help from other countries because China is not taking an L, they're not backing down, and they're not accepting what we are effectively going with. As I said, a tipping point. You have tried to assert American power in a brutal, straightforward, naked way. And in trying to assert this power in this brutal, naked way, many countries will acquiesce, but many won't. And that is the rub. The fact that many of these countries won't necessarily acquiesce. The fact that many of these countries won't acquiesce to the trade war that you are effectively trying to go with is the problem. You've alienated so many countries. And because you've alienated so many countries, they're not coming to your side. They don't even necessarily see you as an ally or as a partner in the way that they would have in the past. And so Europe is now talking with China about removing tariffs off the cars. China has been talking with other countries in Southeast Asia. You have the BRICS countries that are also going to work together. It is a fight, primacy, which economic order will survive. China is like, we will fight this to the bitter end. This clip has been circulating on social media, and it is just brutal. So this is Hong Kong and Macau's Affairs Office Director Zai Belong. Listen to what he says. And it's in a different language. And in fact, let me bring on my guest, because my guest, he's the person I want to talk to on this. Alex Krainer. How are you doing today, man? Thank you for
I'm
joining
doing
me.
very well, and you?
I'm doing good. And just to introduce Alex Krainer, he's founder of Krainer Analytics and creator of iSystem Trend Following. He has worked as a market analyst, researcher, and trader and a hedge fund manager since 1996. He has authored several books, including Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading, The Grand Deception, and Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. Interestingly enough, the Grand Deception apparently has been banned or blacklisted. Look, I'll tell you, any book that's worth blacklisting, I want to read. I'll tell you that. How are you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you?
I am doing well. Thank you for joining me. I'm really happy that you're joining me. Actually, you're the person I wanted to talk to, considering everything that is taking place around the world. I'm going to ask a loaded question, and you can take it however you want it. Why is Donald Trump destroying the U.S. economy and taking the U.S. economy to the brink of stagflation, not just a recession? Why on earth is he unleashing this tariff war?
Okay, so I'm not sure that he's destroying the U.S. economy. That's to begin with, because the United States economy has been on an unsustainable path for a very long time now. And a correction, of course, is well overdue. So what has happened over the last, I would say, maybe 50 years? We could take it all the way back to 1981. There has been a change of course in the U.S. economy. The credit creation has pretty much exploded. The United States economy has been deindustrialized in favor of other nations like China. The United States has been an importer of finished goods and pretty much a consumer-led economy. And much of that consumption has been paid for by credit. You know, the American people have been buying stuff on credit, including homes, and it's created an unsustainable, unpayable debt overhang. Now, if you need a visual on that, which I think is very advisable, people need to look at that and come to appreciate that. You can go to the Federal Reserve of St. Louis FRED website, FRED, and you can pull up two time series. One is called Total Credit Market Debt. They have changed the name of this series to something else, but if you type Total Credit Market Debt in the search engine, it'll come up with a number. And you will get a curve that looks like that, right? It goes up, and I think it reaches somewhere in the neighborhood of $115 trillion. Okay, so that's the total private and public debt in the U.S. economy. And then you can pull up the monetary base, which is another curve that looks like that. But over the same period of time, it arrives to about $6 trillion. So the very, very high curve at $115 trillion is all the debt that's in the U.S. economy. And the much, much lower curve that's sloping much more gradually is the total mass of money that's available for the payment of all these debts, right? It's the definition of unsustainable. They diverge at a rapid pace, and so all the money that's available for payment of all the debts in the United States economy is losing pace. So at some point, something's going to break, and there's going to be a very severe crisis. And so what Trump is trying to do is trying to reverse this system. He has to pretty much bring the wrecking ball on it, and it's going to be very, very painful for many people. But it has to be done because it's going to be very, very painful for everybody, even if he doesn't do anything about it. You know, it'll break all by itself. Now, when it comes to tariffs, it's widely misunderstood as a phenomenon, and here again, the effect of his tariff measure measures is going to be a little bit different from what is being portrayed in the mainstream media. Namely, let's take a look at Chinese exports into the United States. So let's take Nike shoes. And I got this from somebody who explained it well on X in a short video. But he says, a pair of Nike shoes that retails for $100 in the United States costs $10 to produce in China. So let's say if the Chinese have to pay a 50% tariff on those shoes, the 50% is going to be applied to the $10 that it costs to produce those shoes, not to the $100 that they retail for in the United States. So it goes from $10 a pair to $15 a pair, not from $100 to $150. And so then those extra $5, either they're going to be eaten up by Nike in terms of lost margin, or they're going to increase the price by $5 and break even, right? Have the same.
They will. Yeah.
Okay, but you see, another effect happens here because American consumers have the choice of ordering those shoes directly from manufacturers in China. So, do you have to buy it from Nike, or can you just order them from China and pay them $15 or $20, right? And get those same shoes with or without Nike brand on it, but you know what I mean.
But the brand is the thing that's important.
Exactly.
You can have two. Yeah, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, so the people who are screaming about the tariffs are people like Nike, people who have built whole business models on the basis of providing consumer goods to the American consumers and importing them from the countries that manufacture them. And so the United States wasn't on a sustainable path that has been widely acknowledged, and something has got to change. So, whether Trump brings the wrecking ball to this system or he lets it go until it implodes on itself later, pain is coming anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
But what Trump is trying to achieve is he's trying to bring manufacturing back home. And from everything that they have been doing, they have been creating incentives for manufacturers to bring their manufacturing back home in many, many different ways. I could really go on about this forever, but for example, just to give you an example, one of the regions in the world that has benefited the most from the American consumer and the American economy has been Europe, because their whole business model was based on importing cheap oil and gas from Russia, which was firing their manufacturing and technology industries, and then exporting finished products to the United States. The United States and Britain were absorbing something like 2/3 of all of European exports.
Wow.
So a massive trade, right?
Yeah.
Now, even without applying tariffs at all, since Trump took office, and I don't know how this happened, but it did happen, let's say that €1 was costing $1.04. Now, 3 months later, it cost $1.14. So euro became 9% more expensive than the dollar, which means that all of European export to the United States became 9% more expensive, and all of the American exports to Europe became 9% cheaper. So, the competitiveness equation has changed in favor of the United States versus Europe. Then, there's been the blow up of Nord Stream pipelines. That wasn't Trump, but it's a continuation of a certain economic warfare against Europe. Then there's this bombing of Yemen, which makes no sense whatsoever. It's completely idiotic, repugnant, wrong-headed, hard to explain until you understand that between 55 and 60% of all global trade in any given year passes through the Red Sea. And the bulk of that trade is European trade coming from East Asia. only about 3% of American trade is routed through the Red Sea. Since the Trump administration started bombing Yemen, all that trade got blocked. Europeans have no idea. They're so obsessed with Ukraine and with net zero that they didn't even notice, except their most important trade route has been blocked for a month now. It's been since 15th March. And so, Europe is getting one blow after another. Things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And of course, manufacturers, they're sitting and saying, it's not working out. We're losing competitiveness. Our energy is the most expensive energy in the world. The dollar has declined. We're not making as much money on this American trade. Hey, why don't we switch our production to the United States? I promise you, as an entrepreneur, for the first time in my life ever, I'm thinking maybe I need to relocate for the first time ever. And so this will all happen with a delay, but it's going to burst the credit bubble, which is going to burst anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And it might have the effect of bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And then I believe that with fullness of time, it'll be a relatively easy decision for the United States to join the multipolar integrations. Because rather than being the policeman... Sorry?
No, I'm sorry. I just want to interrupt real quick. Trade from Europe, though, because of the cost of energy and everything, meaning it's so expensive to produce those things in Europe with the increased cost of energy and with the wars and everything else, that they're saying, all right, we have a devalued dollar. Energy is cheaper in the US. Maybe we should move to the US. But you're not talking about like Southeast Asia, China, Malaysia, Vietnam. You're not talking about those countries. You're specifically talking about Europe.
Yes, I'm specifically talking about Europe, but you have to keep in mind that many European companies set up manufacturing in China and elsewhere in East Asia, again, largely to supply the American market. Yeah. So a lot of that is going to be completely renegotiated. Now, he came with the big sledgehammer, and now 70 plus countries are taking appointments to come and say, hey, can we come to some kind of a conclusion, some kind of an agreement? Don't do this to us. And there's going to be some kind of agreements, but it's going to be on bilateral basis with a lot of countries. What we had until now is some kind of a managed progression towards turning the United States into a shadow of its former self, completely depleting it, and then collapsing the American economy. This was actually the plan of the global elites who were pushing for globalism. They knew since 1971, when Nixon cut the convertibility of the dollar into gold, they knew that they were going to inflate the fiat bubble, and that was going to destroy the dollar eventually, and that it was going to deplete the United States, its wealth, its the country as a global power. And they knew that they needed an alternative, which is why they have been driving this deindustrialization of the United States in favor of China. Because if you look at the statements by George Soros, by Henry Kissinger, and so forth, they were absolutely determined to make China the next global cop, to make China the next enforcer of their process of globalization. And for that, they needed to build up China into this economic superpower. And, a few problems happened along the way because the Chinese let them in. They played the game as though they were going to become their next global cop. But then with Xi Jinping, they realized this is not happening. And so now they turned against China. Meanwhile, they've weakened the United States to the point where the United States can no longer reverse this and defeat China and reassert themselves as a global superpower. And so now they're kind of lost in space. They are, I think, in the dying agony. We see the Brits trying to cobble up coalitions of the willing. They want to kill Russia somehow, but I think it's a losing game, and I think that it's pretty much lights out within our lifetimes.
Yeah. I have made this argument that we are at a tipping point. And what I mean by tipping point is the US was trying to assert power in various ways, one militaristically in Ukraine, and it failed miserably. I mean, for God's sake, even the New York Times at this point admits that the US was dictating events on the ground. Europe and the US was giving all of the weapons, all of the money, all of this stuff in order to inflict a strategic, military, and economic defeat on Russia, and it didn't happen. And now Trump comes in and tries to assert this economic power by effectively a trade war against the world, whereas China says no. And they have been very clear, we are in this to the bitter end, which the Wall Street Journal describes as a war for primacy, effectively economic primacy, where it's a zero-sum game at this point because of the way that Donald Trump has effectively tried to do this. Varoufakis, in an interview, made this point of saying that this is a fight for survival where, and I'm paraphrasing, Trump is biting, scraping in order to maintain, let's say, a U.S. economic order against what he considers to be a declining empire. How do you define that? I mean, do you see that as being an accurate portrayal? Where would you quibble with the way that's being described?
I think it's very, very difficult to interpret those things as they're happening. We will know much more as the dust settles, when the events are behind us. I have a hard time myself deciding, are people in the Trump administration making it up as they go along, active impulsively, and then figuring out how to deal with the consequences on the fly, or have they thought things through, and whether they have a plan that they are executing? I'm kind of leaning in the direction of they're making it up as they go along, but not necessarily because they haven't thought things through, but because there are definitely two opposing factions within the Trump administration. One of them, which is trying to reassert the United States as a global manufacturing power and trading power, and another one which wants to preserve this rules-based global order. Now, Trump, let's say that the earliest and most important policy position statement came from Marco Rubio on the 15th January when he was having his hearings for the state Secretary of State, when he said that the whole post-World War II global order was more than obsolete. And not only that, it is being used as a weapon against us at present. And I think that this is like a vague formulation of everything we've discussed so far. That the United States was being depleted as a global cop, as the economic power that was sinking deeper and deeper into debt to be the world's leading consumer, to be paying for everybody's exports. And I think that this is the core Trump team wants to dismantle this and set the United States on a different economic basis. And then part of the administration are still loyal to this British free trade approach and the process of globalization. Mm-hmm. And so how they interact is almost like a day-to-day thing that makes it appear like they're making it up as they go along, because they announce a policy measure, and then somebody says like, no, this is crazy, we can't do this, look, all these bad things are going to happen, and then they say like, okay, let's pause it for a while, rethink it, and then we'll see what happens. I'll give you a concrete example.
Well, I can tell you, they are making it up as they go along. And I can show you a clip where they asked Trump about this. And he makes the point of effective. Listen to what he says here, because this is pretty outrageous when you think about
Yeah, go ahead, please.
how aggressive they were with this plan, and then for him to say
Yeah, go
something
ahead,
like
please.
this.
Sir, would you consider exempting some U.S. companies, maybe some larger companies who have been hit hard in the markets last few days during this 90 days?
As time goes by, we're going to take a look at it. There are some that have been hard. There are some that, by the nature of the company, get hit a little bit harder, and we'll take a look at that. Yeah. Just instinctively, more than anything.
Instinctively, he says that they're doing this instinctively. It's like, what do you mean instinctively?
Yeah.
You literally declared a trade war against the world, many of which of these
Yeah.
countries are allies, or it used to be allies.
Sure,
And they're
sure.
like,
But
yeah, that clip is outrageous, considering what's happening. I'm sorry. Please continue.
yeah, let me give you a concrete example of something that's going on, and you'll realize that it is not being discussed along any true terms. It's being masked and dressed up as something else,
Mhm.
but it's really like a three-card Monty and a proxy battle between the United States and Britain. Britain is the driving force behind the quote-unquote rules-based global order and the process of globalization. So here's how things transpired in Ukraine. Last September, before Trump was even elected, Volodymyr Zelensky comes to New York, and I guess just in case Trump won the election, he offers Trump a 500 billion minerals deal for Ukraine. Okay, so that was a piece of news, came, went, nothing much happened. Then, 4 days before Trump is elected on 16th January, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer flies over to Kiev and signs a 100-year partnership between Britain and Ukraine. Then, as it turns out, this partnership has a secret appendix, which pretty much hands over the bulk of the wealth of Ukraine, including its ports, its natural gas deposits, storages, pipelines, airports, nuclear power plants, pretty much the cream of Ukraine's wealth to British interests covertly. So it's hidden. This only leaked out from Ukraine's intelligence that there was this secret appendix. Zelensky himself alluded to it, so we know that it's really there. And then here's the problem. This was signed between Zelensky and not Boris Johnson, sorry, it was Zelensky and Keir Starmer. January 2025. Zelensky's presidential mandate expired in May of 24. So it's a problem because Ukraine's constitution is crystal clear that president's mandate is 5 years, not a day longer, and it cannot be extended for any reason. So even though Boris Johnson afterwards, and it was Boris Johnson, not Keir Starmer, Boris Johnson afterwards in I think in February or March this year, went to Ukraine and he pressured the Rada to pass this resolution extending Zelensky's mandate for another 8 months or whatever. This is unconstitutional. So if a different government comes into power in Kiev and realigns with Moscow, they can say, what you signed here with Zelensky is null and void. You signed it with a private citizen. He was no longer the president of Ukraine. He had no authority to sign this agreement. In other words, the pirate raid that the British arranged and the plunder, that the loot that they took from Ukraine is now in jeopardy unless the United States guarantees, provides security guarantee for Kiev. By that, I mean for the government in Kiev that's aligned with the West and that's going to uphold and honor these agreements, right? It's about plunder. It's about pirate raid.
Yeah.
And the instigator, the chief instigator of all this is Great Britain. Now, they're offering Trump, like, hey, if you provide security guarantee for Kiev, for Ukrainian government, you'll have this $500 billion worth of rare mineral earth from Ukraine. First of all, this probably doesn't exist to begin with. You know, there's very, very well founded doubts that these minerals don't exist in feasible quantities to begin with. So he's giving like a cat in a bag in order to give a security guarantee to Kiev, in order for Britain to be able to continue to loot Ukraine for their benefit. Okay, why am I explaining all this? The world, the global rules-based global order, led by by Great Britain, is trying to get the United States to be the policeman to secure this loot for Ukraine at the cost of. So, United States has to shoulder the cost of providing the security. So, it's going to have a cost in troops, in treasure, in material, right? They have to police this. They have to take risk of conflict with Russia, with a nuclear superpower that could escalate into a nuclear Armageddon. And their reward for this are these elusive rare earth minerals which may or may not exist, right? So upside, downside, right? That's what Trump is being offered by the existing rules-based order. They're being cheated in a vulgar three-card Monty by the Brits. Okay,
Yep.
On the other side, he's talking to Putin, and Putin says, we have a whole lot more than what Ukrainians have. So the total resource wealth of Ukraine is, let's say, it's estimated at about $12 trillion. Bulk of this is already under Russia's control. And then Russia itself has an estimated $75 to $90 trillion worth of natural resource wealth. And the Russians are saying, join us. We can develop all this together. We already provide the security. You don't have to provide security guarantees to anybody. We're taking care of it. And there's no risk of us going to war against one another. So if he deals with the Russians, the math is downside risk, or maybe downside risk is next to nothing. Upside benefit is massive.
Right.
Okay. Now, this is the reality. This is the economic math of the choice that the Americans are facing.
Mhm.
On the face of it, it will be an easy choice, and the Trump administration will say, all right, we're going with the Russians. We don't have to be a global policeman. We don't have to risk a global nuclear conflict for these freaking minerals that may or may not exist. We can join up with the Russians, develop all these resources, and have peaceful, constructive trade with the Russians, with the Chinese, with the Indians, with the Iranians, with everybody. That's our choice. However, it runs into ideological headwinds.
Right there. Yep.
You see?
Yeah.
So they can't come out in the open and say it, which is why the whole situation is being dressed up into, freedom and democracy versus autocracies, and our traditional allies in Europe and France and and all of this is confusing the issues and making it very difficult for Trump administration to actually go where they want to go. And that then brings the United States to a very easy choice. And this easy choice has been formulated. I think it was Larry Johnson who said it, whom I heard it say it first, but I'm not 100% sure. And he said, we have the choice of being the polite guest at the global banquet, or to be the world's policeman, enforcing some kind of an order that they have to submit to.
Right.
That's the choice. And so I think that the pure business math, the pure economic math, is definitely by now in favor of being the polite guest at the global banquet. But the ideological baggage
Makes it difficult.
is
Yeah.
making this equation obscured.
To back up what
people
you're
think-
saying, by the way, Witkoff is saying something very similar, where he is saying, look, we are trying to make a larger deal. And if you notice, Kirillov came to the US, meaning a businessman went to the US.
Yes.
Witkoff
Yes.
goes to Russia, a businessman going to Russia. They're talking business. Like
Yes.
Ukraine seems to be, I kept saying that if the conversation was about Ukraine, there was nothing really to talk about. The Russians have effectively won this war.
Exactly.
And they are not deviating from the lines that they have basically drawn. But if you bring in, hey, we can have this business relationship, we can have a new security architecture of Europe based on trade, based on these type of things. The fascinating thing about this is Europe is not included in that conversation.
Yes, exactly. And so, yes, so you see what Witko is talking about and what he's discussing with Kirillov and what is going to be discussed between Trump and Vladimir Putin is exactly this. It's almost crystal clear what the choice before the United States is, but they can't come out and say it.
Right.
You know, it's a problem because of these ideological obfuscations that, you know, we've been at the receiving end of more than 20 years of solid 24/7 Russophobic propaganda. Russia bad. For the last 20 years, every Hollywood movie had Russians as the bad guys. To now come out and say, and like, hey, you know what? We're gonna ally with Russia, and we're gonna drop these European leeches behind, and we're going to move on because the post-World War II global order was actually unfavorable to us. Well, it was both. It was favorable and unfavorable because there was, you know, the United States did get to have the global reserve currency, so they got to import a whole lot of real goods and services from around the world for printed up papers and computer digits. But that also creates a liability later because you have all these 30, 32, 34 trillion dollars of US denominated assets in the abroad, which might at a given moment rush back in and create havoc. Mm-hmm. So it's a, you know, like it's a blessing and a curse all in the same go.
Yeah.
But you know, doing a deal with the Russians, which is favorable, and then doing a deal with the Chinese, which would be favorable to the United States, and then joining these multipolar, because what are the Chinese doing? And Russians are going along with it. The Chinese are positioning themselves as a global manufacturing hub.
Right.
They want the whole global South to be affluent nations full of affluent consumers with purchasing power that can become their customers, right? And so that then we go back to that story about Nike shoes. You know, we can, hey, and now you'll see in the social media, the Chinese are pushing these stories one after another. You know, look, hey, you can buy this handbag for $38,000 in a high street boutique in Europe, but we can make exactly the same bag from exactly the same materials, exact same process, only without the little logo, and you'll pay $1,000 for it. So, you know, it's all the businesses that have benefited from the status quo who are now screaming against Trump dismantling all this. But ultimately, I think that most of the ordinary people will benefit from the changes. Maybe not in the very short term, but not too far down the road. You know, there's going to be increased employment. There's going to be manufacturing. There's going to be trade. And now, if you're in a good relationship with Russia, with China, with India, with Iran, with Brazil, with all of these countries, then you have 3 or 4 billion affluent consumers everywhere around the world that can absorb your production and your manufacturing output. And I think that's definitely a better future then ramping up debt ad infinitum to be able to absorb all these Ferraris and Mercedeses and Louis Vuitton handbags and Moet and Chandon champagne, and then at the same time be spending these trillions of dollars on policing everybody,
Right.
so that they submit to this global order.
Alex, I would tell you, when I have a conversation with about economists, they often ignore the ideological baggage. Now, you did mention ideological baggage that's difficult for Trump to kind of just do what is in his own, good sense, right? We shouldn't be at war with these countries. The notion that we spend $10 trillion destroying Iraq, Afghanistan, et cetera, is outrageous. All of that stuff was just debt. Agreed. I agree with you on all that stuff. I disagree that manufacturing is going to come back to the US in that way. And I also disagree. If you listen to J.D. Vance, when J.D. Vance gave his speech, one of the things he said in that speech was the entire point of globalization was this belief that the US and Europe would effectively sit atop of this kind of economic chain where we profit and they remain poor, meaning that was the framing that they were effectively working with. And countries like China was able to pull themselves out of that, start doing manufacturing, but also start designing themselves, which effectively broke the model, in which JD Vance is like, okay, we need another model where the US can stay on top. I get the sense that this is more about ideological primacy, this notion of we need to remain, if not in charge, a superpower atop of other countries. Like, I don't get the sense that the US or Donald Trump is doing this with the idea of we want to make the global South wealthy. I get the sense that Donald Trump is thinking to himself, how can we stay on top? How can we create an economic order where the United States effectively benefits, as opposed to where we are now, where all of this money is going into other countries, et cetera, except China being one of them. And also one other thing, we benefited from that. Like the globalization thing, you might say Soros, whoever came up with it, however they did it, but it's a rational act for companies who were CEOs who think to themselves, how can I maximize my profit? Oh, I know. I can ship manufacturing overseas. I can pay politicians to drop any kind of import tax that is coming in from these goods coming into the country. I can fire Bob and Tom and Jerome, and I can pay, I don't want to be racist about the names, but I can pay somebody in China or Mexico or the Philippines $3 an hour as opposed to the $15 or $20 that they're making in the United States. These things seems to be rational acts in a capitalist system where people are trying to make as much money as they can possibly make.
Sure.
And they just seem to have done this to the detriment of the US in regards to industry, manufacturing, et cetera. With Trump coming in 50 years later saying, hey, this is not great for us. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Does it really require a mastermind for something that seems to be rational in regards to an economic system that effectively compels, pushes, incentivizes people to do exactly that?
Well, unless I misunderstood the question, Jamarl, I think that yes, it does require a mastermind because you need to understand how the system works. And we are never given the truth about the way system works, and well, okay, first to begin with, we have to do away with the notion that any nation is a monolith, right?
Mhm.
So to say that we benefited, you probably didn't.
Yeah.
Most people in the United States probably didn't. And it's easy enough to see it. People's productivity goes like this, but their real wages are stagnating as prices go up. So, there's more and more poverty, there's more homelessness, the middle class is disappearing and so forth.
Just to be clear, I mean the rich benefited. I'm sorry, please continue.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then not all of the rich, it's a very narrow segment. You don't see it in the aggregates, if you look at the GDP growth and all of these things. Of course, that benefits some people, but it leaves most of other people
Right.
behind. And then the way the economic system works and the way it's being manipulated, sometimes we don't find out, other times we find out much later. Okay, I'll give you another concrete example, which is I spent most of my life working as an oil market analyst, right? And so I spent good 10-15 years reading oil market analysis by so many expert analysts and institutions and organizations like the Energy Intelligence Agency and the International Energy, there's a whole bunch of them. And I've been diligently reading this, analyzing supply, demand, blah, 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 blah. I'll take you back to 2003. Oil prices were trading in the mid-20s per barrel, like 20 so many dollars per barrel.
Yeah.
And then we had like this big trend, and they reached about $146 a barrel at some point in 2008.
I remember this. Yeah.
And everybody had something to say about this. There were all these explanations about why this happened. I just learned perhaps the key part of that story. What happened? As the United States invaded Iraq in March of 2003, at the same time, the American banking system obtained, by hook and by crook, the collateral of the largest oil field in the world, which is the Alberta oil sands. It was set at 175 billion barrels.
Wow.
Now, to make sure that the value of that collateral is maximized, when they went to Iraq, and maybe that's why they went to Iraq, they didn't go there to steal Iraqi oil as such. They went there to destroy Iraqi oil production in order to pump up the price of oil, in order to maximize the value of this collateral in Alberta, Canada, which somehow got hoarded by the Rockefeller interests in New York, and which then fueled the credit cycle that created the housing bubble, which popped at the end of 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the plan was, we go to the Middle East, destroy oil production, we create a big problem there, we pump up the oil prices because we just obtained this massive amount of collateral, and it was a lot of it was fraudulent. There was a lot of fraud, and it was they've been working on this for many years. It's been since the 1980s. And then, the banking interests gave lots and lots of loans to the oil industry, and then that mass of money became the collateral for the housing bubble, and then 8 or 9 million American homeowners lost their homes. But it was a big. They constructed a big giant
Bubble.
conveyor belt of wealth, transferring it from the people in the from the people of the United States via housing bubble to the very, very top of the banking elites. As an oil market analyst, I've been reading about this and about that and about the oil sands and about the fracking and Middle Eastern conditions and Iraq and Iran and this and that and Saudi reserves, and not one analyst at any point mentioned the relationship between Alberta sands, oil sands, and the housing bubble in the United States. But somebody way above all these analysts and all these day-to-day events knew exactly what the game was. They scripted the game, they executed the game, and they ended up plundering a massive amount of wealth from the whole society. Now, it may not be easy to believe this, but if you look at all the events as they happened, and the effect that they have, if you were going to plan it that way, then that's what you would do.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So oil price in 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, was $25 a barrel.
And it shot up immediately
Oil
when they
price,
did it.
yeah, oil price when the housing bubble popped was $146 a barrel. So they were successful in bumping up the price of oil, which bumped up the value of this collateral, which was in Canada, but became the collateral of the New York Rockefeller interests. And then they used that to push subprime mortgages on people all across the United States, because that too was an asset. Then they repackaged it and they sold it. They made up like bandits. They created like a $9 trillion housing bubble, and people lost wealth. Middle East was
Destroyed.
destroyed and flowing in blood up to their knees, but the bankers made out like bandits, and we didn't know, did we? We didn't.
But you don't accept the ideological version of this with the George Bush, people around him, the Dick Cheneys of the world, thought that they can reshape the Middle East using American power to do so, considering that Russia couldn't necessarily, meaning Soviet Union had collapsed. The United States was the only superpower. George Bush and his people, in fact, I can't even think of the name of the document, but I think it
Project
was
for the New American Century, right?
Project for the New American Century.
Yeah.
Thank you. Like, where this is an ideological project, where they were doing this with the idea. In fact, Wesley Clark, when Wesley Clark points out they wanted to go into all of these countries, with Iran being the last country, with the idea of being reshaping the Middle East with American
Sure.
might.
Yeah.
That's an ideological framing. But you don't, I guess what I'm asking is,
No, I don't reject it, because I have been perfectly aware of all this for many years now. I know about Wesley Clark. I know about the project of. I learned about the Project for the New American Century about 3 weeks after 9/11 happened.
yeah.
Which
So,
is when I
but
felt
you
like,
think they
oh
dovetail?
my God, this is
Yeah.
this is why this is going on. But and of course, ideology. When you want to change society, a revolution or war or whatever happened, you basically need three main ingredients. You need charismatic leaders, you need compelling ideology, and you need some triggering event, some kind of
Like a 9/11.
like 9/11, exactly. So was George W. Bush a charismatic leader? Well, they kind of built him up to that. The Project for the New American Century might have been the ideological backdrop, but the objective is always to do with plunder of wealth,
Yeah.
not just from around the world, but also from your own domestic populations. Because let's face it, the banking, the money lender oligarchies, they are equal opportunity pirates. They
Yes,
don't
they are.
make a difference between foreign populations and domestic population. For them, we're all hackable animals. We all serve our purpose, and when we're no longer useful, then we become useless eaters, and they want to be rid of us.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that the ideology is probably one step down in the real reasons for global events. Ideology is there to align the forces towards achieving certain objectives. But the money lending oligarchies, they don't care about ideology. They needed the United States to do this work in the Middle East, but they were going to drop the United States behind and switch to China as their global cop at a later stage anyhow. So it wasn't out of any attachment to the idea that the United States will be the sole superpower in the world, and that we're going to have the New American Century, and there's going to be full spectrum dominance and blah, blah, blah. They don't care about any of this. But that kind of stuff is useful to motivate the people at the Pentagon, in the military hierarchy, in the diplomatic corps, in the politicians who can thump their chest and say like, we're number one, we're the best, and we should rule the world, and so forth. So that's what the ideology is for. I don't think that ideology in itself is necessarily the highest level incentive for these things.
I see. Cash. How can we maximize? How can we make money? Basically, I mean, look, I would agree with you that they created a bubble of cash out of effectively thin air the moment that they went into the Middle East. And if
Yes.
you were trying to inflate the price of oil, invading the Middle East is one way to do it. Attacking Iran is one way to do it, for example, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I can't disagree necessarily with the effect and what happened, because I did happen in real terms. I'm curious on your take. I mean, so if Trump is unsuccessful in doing this, because keep in mind, Trump is only going to be in power for 3 years. He may be able to make the relationship with Russia, and I actually hope he does. The notion that we are at odds seems absurd to me. So I hope he can make amends with Russia in this case. But he is rubbing up against China. He's rubbing up against the rest of the world. And he's even rubbing up against Europe at this point, where Europe is, there are articles coming out in Foreign Affairs, I think it's Foreign Affairs, saying the transatlantic relationship has effectively broken. I mean, do you see it that way? That this
yes.
change?
Yeah. Well, even if you listen to voices from out of Europe, they're now writing about the United States being an enemy openly. You could read. I think at some point in March or February, George Monbiot, the famous guy from The Guardian, who otherwise on some subjects comes across as very thoughtful and articulate, but he wrote this article which, if you follow George Monbiot, he has a certain style, he has a certain mindset. This fell very much outside of this mindset, and he was saying that, the United States is the enemy now, apparently, and we need to be prepared to fight against the United States. And it doesn't read like his style at all. So, which tells me that he's probably one of those journalists that gets a tap on the shoulder from the intelligence agencies and say, sign here, and you're publishing this article. And then he said, like, well, okay, that's the job. So he does. And then, there are European politicians and public servants who are increasingly demonizing the United States in Europe, and start with Denmark over Greenland as well. And so this is very much real. And let's not forget that the United States became the republic that it was meant to be exactly as a reaction to these European oligarchic interests,
right,
who are essentially still ruling Europe. It's, the facade is we're liberal democracies where, the people are sovereign and they decide how their societies are going to evolve. But now we are finding out that that's not at all the case, that we are ruled by, we don't know exactly who, but it turns out it's probably exactly the same hereditary families that have ruled Europe 200 and 300 years ago, and that they have interests that are completely at odds with the interests of the ordinary people. And the most interesting episode in this is exactly the change from the Biden administration, the autopen administration, and Trump administration, because Trump almost immediately said, okay, Ukraine, we're done with this, right? We're done with this. And he called up Vladimir Putin, and the relations between Russia and the United States have been reestablished. By far, the most important bilateral relation in the world, determining the future of humanity, whether we go to peace and prosperity or nuclear Armageddon. Donald Trump picked up the phone and spoke with Vladimir Putin. And from there, we don't know how it ends, but at least they're talking.
Agreed.
So that's great.
But you don't think
And now but wait, here's where I'm going with this, because so far now, for decades, we have been given the impression that Europeans are simply being coerced by this evil empire, the United States, into following along into all these imperial misadventures in the Middle East, in the Oceania, in here and there, fighting these crazy wars because the crazy Americans are being so, warlike and violent and arrogant, and we're just being loyal allies, and we end up looking bad, but it's not because we want to, really. Well, now Trump says, okay, I'm done with Ukraine, and Europeans, instead of saying like, okay, that's over, now we can go back to peace and we can bring an end to this whole mess. No, they go absolutely hysterical, and they want to continue the war however they can. It's being led by Britain, France, Netherlands, and the Baltic states. Okay, the Baltic states probably are, going along with this, but the actual instigators of this in this order are Britain, France, and the Netherlands. And now you see that when the United States moved away, they're not just loyal followers of the big evil empire. They are the big evil empire. The United States was merely being their enforcement muscle.
Yeah, Europe went bananas. They went absolutely bananas.
It's surreal. It's surreal because they've been maintaining for decades. They've been maintaining this facade of innocence. Oh, we're just allies. We go along because we're loyal, because the United States is leading the way, and we disagree, but and now you see the reality.
It's like, oh, they're twisting our arm. It's like, they are going bananas, and they're doing any and everything to sabotage the peace deal. And
yes,
the fact that Witkoff wouldn't even disclose what they were talking about gets across like the ideological difficulty of even pushing it in that particular direction. Last question. Donald Trump is also an oligarch. And the people around him are also oligarchs. The Republican Party is about to put $20 trillion on the debt using this goofy mathematics in order to do it. It's going to be unfunded, and they're going to give that money effectively to the rich. And even the tariffs that they collect, we are going to have to pay those tariffs, where the rich are going to get kickbacks and tax cuts. And make it even worse, Trump is talking about putting 25% on pharmaceuticals. We already pay more for medicine than anywhere else in the world. Hasn't this boat of globalization left the barn? And ultimately, anything that Trump is going to have to do is going to have to work. I'm not against tariffs. I'm against the way he's using them, where it's just seemingly random and quote unquote instinctual in the way that he's effectively going about it. But they're effectively also oligarchs. These guys, like, whether they're in Europe or whether in the United States, this stuff is done specifically to benefit the rich. It's not for us.
You are absolutely right, Jamarl. They are oligarchs, but we are stuck with oligarchs. Now, that doesn't mean that we are stuck with gloom and doom and hopelessness, because throughout history, oligarchs have also been reformers. If you can go, you can trace the continuity of this system of governance back to the times of ancient Rome and even to Greek antiquity. And what you will find is that already in ancient Rome, you had the same pattern of events, of how a society basically eats itself and destroys itself under oligarchic rules, under the rule of the oligarchs. But then you also have other oligarchs who recognize this and who say, we are on the road to perdition. We need to change course. This is unsustainable. We're going to destroy the whole system. And then they try to rally the people to a cause of changing the course. And in Rome, there have been a whole series, dozens of these would-be reformers, most of whom by far have been oligarchs and aristocrats themselves,
Mhm.
like the Gracchi brothers, like Catiline, like Julius Caesar. They were all slaughtered. They were all
Yeah.
either exiled or slaughtered, along with thousands of their followers, because these oligarchies don't joke around. You know, they eliminate any influence that is jeopardizing their how do you call them,
The
their
rule.
privileges.
Yeah, the power.
So
Right.
and so this is, you know, they assassinated Abraham Lincoln. They assassinated Robert F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy. These are all also oligarchs, but who wanted to reform the system and change it, right?
It's fair.
If you take, for example, Elon Musk, I'm sure that he has his interests. I'm sure that he's not taken the vow of poverty and that he wants to make everybody else rich and himself poor. But you know, if your business is selling electric cars, do you agree with the idea of corralling people into 15-minute cities where they will have no need for your cars?
No.
Or do you want people to be prosperous and free so they can drive around and buy your cars? What I mean to say is that not every oligarch has the same incentives and the same motivations. Not all, you know, they're not a solid monolithic alliance of people who have money against people who have no money. You know, like, it's not that
Yeah.
all people with money are completely tight together against people who have no money.
It's not a monolith.
So, but you know, it's what I don't want to say with this is that, hey, let's relax because we're in good hands. Elon Musk and Donald Trump are going to fix things for us. No, you know, Donald Trump was swept into office by the will of the people, and I think that that same will of the people can steer Donald Trump in the direction that people want. What I mean to say by that is, rather than saying like, okay, we got him into the office, and now, you know, we watch and we make sure that we get what we deserve. No, I think you have to keep
Push.
what do they say? That the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.
Yes.
We have to remain vigilant, and we have to continue to exert pressure on these people to deliver what we want. And they're not immune to these pressures. You know, even the hardcore dictators of this world are always afraid of the people. People power is extreme. Remember Alex Karp a few months ago when there were all these protests over Gaza?
Yes.
And he was saying, if we lose the intellectual battle, we will not be able to deploy any Western army anywhere in the world. You know, and this is also why they're so extremely vexed about misinformation and disinformation, because they can't control the narrative, they can't control the will of the people, and because they are afraid of us. We are many, they are few. We have the power, they pretend to have the power. And so what I mean to say is that Donald Trump and his cabinet are going to go in the direction that people demand, if people demand and make their demands heard loud and clear. So, you know, we don't have to be afraid of the fact that they are oligarchs, that they're wealthy people. We don't have to assume that because they're oligarchs and they're wealthy, that they're our enemies automatically. And we have to never, ever, ever assume that we have no power, because we do.
Alex, you are fantastic. Thank you for this.
Oh, thank you very much,
I
Jamarlt.
really do
Very
appreciate
kind.
this conversation. I enjoyed this conversation. And I really hope
Likewise,
the audience
likewise.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And we have an actual really good crowd. So thank you for this. Alex
Brilliant.
Krainer. He is
Jamarlt,
founder.
thank you for having me. Warm greetings from Croatia to all your viewers and listeners, and until the next time.
Oh, you're in Croatia. Fair enough. Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Alex Krainer. He's founder
Take care.
of Krainer Analytics and creator of iSystems Trend Following. He has worked as a market analyst, researcher, trader, and hedge fund manager since 1996. He has authored several books, including Mastering Uncertainty, Commodities Trading, and The Grand Deception, and Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. Thank you, my man. You be safe. Thank you for this.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
You have a good one. Bye-bye. All right. Engrossing conversation that I enjoyed. Ted, I'm sorry for getting to you late.
No
How are
problem.
you, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm always fascinated to always any kind of Roman analogies. I'm always into.
Yeah, because it's so like history doesn't repeat but it rhymes. And I
Right.
stole that from Mark Twain, I think.
Yes.
And it does. Like, regardless of the technology. Like, if you're watching a movie, for example, it's not really the technology in sci-fi, it's the human relationships. The sci-fi is kind of like the sprinkling around the human relationships and the interactions between these people. The motivation is very similar. You know, I get cold, I get hot, I need food, I need water. If I get control or power, I may act a particular way when I get that power. Sociopaths tend to rise to the top because they like there's a through line in regards to how we act as human beings. And whether it's now, whether it's 1,000 years ago, people are people. Anywhere you go.
Yeah, the things don't really change. I remember learning that, and I picked up a book of speeches by oh my God, the famous Cicero, and it was like Cicero was a conservative. He'd be a Republican now probably.
Yeah.
And he was calling for basically trickle down economics. Lower taxes for the rich so that they would invest and create jobs. I was like, wow, 2,000 years ago, things don't change. It's the same thing.
How do you maintain the state? Machiavelli, another fascinating. Like, if you're going, he has a bad name, but he's a realist. They're like, he was in a situation where they were trying to balance against multiple powers in order to keep, what is the place? I forget the name of the place in Italy. But he was trying to balance between multiple powers. And he was like,
Florence.
What was it? Florence.
Venice.
It was Florence.
Yeah.
No, it was Florence. You're right the first time, I think. And in his mind, he was like, there are things that I notice for people in power when they succeed, and there are things that I notice for people in power when they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having a conversation with my mom yesterday because, Bernie Sanders has been running around the country. And I have asked this question, why? It's like, what? There's no presidential election coming up.
Right.
I don't think Sanders is going to run at 84. And yet he's been having these barnstormer rallies, like with 20, 30, 40,000 people. He's at Coachella. And as I told my mom, he's too much of a good man. And she was like, well, what do you mean by that? I said, a good man needs a really bad man in order to keep that government in power. And you need a bad guy. It's almost like I'm inclined to believe you need a sociopath who, for the most part, has your back, believes in your cause, and is willing to do the things that you don't necessarily want to do.
I always think about LBJ about this, right? So LBJ had a really hard time getting the Civil Rights Act passed. Mm-hmm. And in the end, as we learned from, people know about the Nixon White House tapes, but the White House Oval Office was taped going back to Harry Truman. So there's tapes for all of those presidencies. And so some LBJ tapes came out that had him in a conversation with a key Southern senator the night before the big vote, and said, I really need your vote. And he's like, Lyndon, he was from Georgia. I can't do that. My people would never put up with it. And he's like, Johnson was like, I'm really sorry because you've had a really good career in the Senate. And he's like, what do you mean by that, Lyndon? I thought we were friends. It's like, yeah, well, that little filly you've been fucking in your office, she works for me. That news conference is going to be amazing. And then he's like, what? He's like, I'm going to be counting on your vote tomorrow. It's like, and that's it. That's seriously how the Civil Rights Act got passed, because LBJ cultivated this friendship over the course of 25 years with this man, and then threw him, like, when he needed to cash that shit, set him up, and it's like, it isn't personal. I just need that vote.
Put a knife in him.
Yeah.
Bernie would have never done that.
No.
That's what I mean. Bernie would have never gotten that vote. He would have never gotten the Civil Rights Act passed.
And who's more effective? Who made more change? I mean, I love Bernie as a dude, but who's really gotten things done? I mean, that was one of the fair criticisms that Hillary Clinton had against him. That he had not. Of course, Hillary Clinton had only ever sponsored 6 bills in her career, all renaming post offices. So she wasn't one to talk, but still, she was not wrong about Bernie. You know,
No, she wasn't wrong about him. I mean, that's a problem. Like, it really is a problem. Like, if you're running against Joe Biden, because from my point of view, you need to win to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to win, and
that's what James Carville gets right.
Yeah, that Carville perfectly gets that right. Politics is about winning.
Mm-hmm.
God, I hate to use a Star Trek reference, but it's irrelevant. When Cisco is in a situation, Starfleet officers, they're honest, moral, ethical. They're the best of humanity. They're all of these things. And yet, when Cisco was in a war and the question came up, do I kill a Romulan senator and frame the Jemadar in order to get Romulans into the war?
Mm-hmm.
Do I do that? Now, Sanders would say no.
Mm-hmm.
Picard would say no. Many of those officers would say, no, I can't do that. That is beyond the pale. Okay, but you're talking about billions of lives.
Right.
So your integrity in this situation is worth more than billions of people living. And I understand this is a mean, the end versus the, the end versus the means argument.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a realistic argument. It's a chess argument, right? If I do this, this happens. It's a and B. One follows the other. And yeah, it can take you into some dark places. But it is what it is. And Sanders doesn't seem to have that he's not that guy. And so, no, He doesn't want to throw a punch at Joe Biden. He doesn't want to put a knife in Joe Biden. He doesn't want to run hard against Hillary Clinton because he doesn't want to have the chance of making her lose to Trump. Dude, this is zero sum.
Right.
Like, this is it, right? This is your moment.
And if I'd been in the room with him, I would have said, Bernie, honestly, it doesn't work that way anyway. If she ends up being the nominee is after a hard-fought primary battle with you, it'll strengthen her for the battle against Trump.
Right there. It inoculates her, as opposed to whatever Trump is going to throw at her in that other contest. It doesn't weaken the candidate. Like, hard races.
They're all politicians are traumatized by their own personal experiences, and I'm thinking about it's widely believed that Carter lost in 1980 because he was beaten up by Ted Kennedy in the primaries. Look, I was there. I was at the convention in 1980. That's not what happened. Jimmy Carter was too conservative for the moment. It was 1980 was a change election, very much like 2016. Yep. People wanted the left or the right. They weren't interested in moderation. Jimmy Carter represented that moderate centrist thing. Nobody cared. That's what happened. And Ted Kennedy represented the left.
Change, yeah. Well, from my understanding, Sanders didn't want to be considered Ralph Nader.
And Ralph Nader isn't Ralph Nader, because Ralph Nader didn't do what he's accused of doing.
Exactly. Democrats pinned that on him as if it was his fault. Al Gore couldn't even win his own state.
Right.
I'm sorry. There's political history.
Well, not to mention in the recount battle, Al Gore's people were morons. I mean, they requested state recounts in Florida in Democratic counties. Okay, so it's so dumb. If you're trolling for additional Democratic votes, you go in Republican counties because those are run by Republicans who are going to undercount Democratic votes.
Right.
And stuff.
Right.
And then also by not asking for a statewide recount, that opened the door to the Supreme saying, "Oh, this violates the Equal Protection Clause, and therefore, all the states and all the votes in Florida aren't counting equally, so we're throwing this whole thing out." It was just incredibly stupid.
Yeah, just Your knowledge of political history always astounds me, and I'm always so impressed by it. The audience may not know it. Oh, but Ted on this
Thank
stuff
you,
is
Jamal.
fascinating. I've sat there at times on the radio show just listening to you, like, wow, this is fascinating. I've learned so much in this case. I want to go first and foremost to where's the clip? Where's the clip? I mean, for one, we could talk about Harvard, but I want to go to Tim Walz.
Oh,
I want
Harvard.
to go to Tim Walz.
Hmm.
The Democratic Party is not getting the hint on the issue of Gaza. Now, there was an estimate that millions did not show up for Kamala Harris for that specific issue alone. The polling that recently came out showed that the overwhelming majority of, well, I can't say overwhelming, depends on the demographic, but the majority of the American public for the first time has effectively turned against Israel, saying there's something wrong with that state. We don't approve of what they're doing, and we don't approve of that state. Even Republicans ended up nearly 50-50 on that. And this is while Trump is in office, going in a very specific direction on the issue of Israel. So right off the bat, you have an American public that disagrees with this genocide and the murder of all of these people. They've lost the intellectual battle on that issue.
It was inevitable.
How do you see these images coming out day after day after day, and it doesn't affect you as a human being?
It went on to, from the Israeli point of view, from the propaganda point of view, it went on for too long.
Not to mention the rapes, the cutting off heads, all of the stuff, and this stuff was never
the
found.
executions of the ambulance drivers.
It's disgusting. And yet, when Tim Walz, and keep in mind, Joe Biden backed this. There was nothing that Israel did where Joe Biden actually did anything about. And there was even reporting that the thought was that Israel would go on for a few weeks, but the US wouldn't necessarily back it longer than that. And when they kept going and they realized, oh, they're not going to push back. Fair enough. We have a free hand. Joe Biden would grumble, but the grumbles were purely for political reasons. And even when he was into Tony Blinken, the man who went to Israel and said, I am a Jew. And you think to yourself, why are you telling me that you are a Jew? You are supposed to be a US citizen working in US interests. Full stop. That, they always say dual loyalty is anti-Semitic. Then what the hell is he doing saying, I am a Jew, when you're supposed to be working in US interests? What they wanted was Blinken to come back and say, hey, by the way, I got a deal at the DNC convention. That didn't happen because at that point, Joe Biden was so frail, weak, and ridiculous that Netanyahu paid him no mind and was using politics to put a knife in him. Tim Walz, after Kamala Harris loses, and part for being one-to-one with Joe Biden in backing, supporting, and defending a genocide, given 70 to 80% of the money for the genocide, Tim Walz still hasn't gotten the hint. So he goes on Chris Hayes, and Chris Hayes asks him this question, and listen to his answer. I want to get your take on his answer. I'm sorry, upstairs, I don't know what the fuck they're doing upstairs. They are losing their minds. And somebody must have just moved into the apartment upstairs.
We can't hear it, Jamal. It's only.
Oh, well, I'm about to play it now. I'm playing it now.
Okay.
Here, but on the Gaza question, should there have been a more definitive break with the administration on Gaza specifically?
Well, I think we would have been clearer because a Harris administration wouldn't have us in the situation we are now. Nothing has gotten better. The situation with Donald Trump of stumping on that, we could have been in a different place. That wasn't believed by a large number of people, but I think it's clear now. And what I would say is we still need to have a two-state solution. We still need to bring peace to Gaza. We still need self-determination for the Palestinians, and Israel's needs to right for its security. Those pauses haven't changed. Donald Trump's doing none of that.
Governor Tim Walz, thank you.
That position is the exact same position that Kamala Harris had during the race. Meaning the notion of saying, well, things would have been clearer. In what sense? I mean,
right.
Joe
Details,
Biden,
please.
What are the details? I mean, you're effectively saying the exact same thing that Kamala Harris has said during the race. And he's like, it wasn't believed. No duh, because you're saying stuff like
that.
And
I still don't believe him when he says, well, when Chris Hayes says that.
I'm sorry, please give me a take.
Says, that's clear now. No, it isn't. I mean, there may be people who really regret that Kamala Harris, well, there are. All my neighbors here on the Upper West Side all wish that Kamala Harris was president. But nobody, including them, thinks that that the Gaza situation would be any different or better from the Palestinian standpoint if Harris were the president. Nobody, even Harris's most ardent defenders, nobody believes that. It would be exactly the same thing. There's no question about it. I mean, I don't know if Harris would have been going after Columbia University for their fictional anti-Semitism on campus. I don't know, but maybe it's possible. Maybe not quite as aggressively, but certainly the facts on the ground. I mean, those ambulance drivers would have been massacred just the same. Would have made no difference.
That American kid would have been murdered just the same.
Mm-hmm.
She might have grumbled, but doing anything different, she would have still given money. She would have still given support in the UN Security Council.
Mm-hmm.
She still would have shielded. And keep in mind, Joe Biden was also going after those college campuses. The same guy, and that's the part that blows my mind. When the Black Lives Matter protest was taking place, and like I said, 8% were peaceful, but there were parts where they were burning down police stations, or they were taking cities, or taking areas of cities and holding them as if they are somehow like their little own, mini whatever the hell they were trying to create. And Joe Biden will come out and give a strident defense for it, meaning even with the excesses, will give a strident defense. And as you pointed out, the fictional anti-Semitism that are on the campuses, he would come out and give speeches going after those students in a way that he did not do at the BLM protests. That is astonishing in the way they were doing it. And so Walz is acting as if something would have been different without defining what would have been different. And anytime I hear that dog whistle or that nonsense of a two-state solution, okay, that's a shiny object.
I believed that until the first Intifada, and after that, I knew it was like, no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's a dog whistle. I mean, dog whistle is not the right word.
It's the Israelis who
don't shiny
want
object.
it. It's the Israelis who don't want it. Okay, they're clear on this. Their government officials are clear on it. The Knesset is clear on it. The media, except for Haaretz, is clear on it. The polls are clear on it. It's not a question of like, oh, like I don't trust Israelis, or it's just that the politics aren't there. I've been to Israel. There's lots of really great, nice people there, but there's just the point is that there's not, even among liberal pro-Palestinian Israelis, there's really just not any appetite for a two-state solution. And it comes down to this, it comes down to this kind of like apartheid mentality that, they know that demographics are not on their side to keep it a Jewish state. And that's what it boils down to. They know that if they incorporate all of the occupied territories into one unified Republic of Palestine, or, Greater Israel, or whatever they want to call it, it's going to be it will be a 50-50 Jewish Palestinian state, and that's going to be, they don't want that. That would overturn the whole idea of the creation of the state of Israel, which was, it was a colony. It was a Jewish colony created by the Brits after World War I. That's it.
Yeah. I remember it's a fascist thing. And there's a hatred for the Palestinian population that is deep, and it's hard for Americans to fully get unless they're talking about.
If you haven't seen it, it's hard to understand. I mean,
yes,
like I've seen. So I mean, in this country, we've seen obviously racial hatred. I remember, I lived right on the border. We used to live right on the border with Harlem, and my local subway station was in Harlem. So I would walk through this corner of Harlem to get to my subway, and I'd see like cops driving down the street, and they had a loudspeaker, and there'd be like some black kids hanging out on the stoop, and they would literally, this was in the 80s, this was in the 90s, and they'd literally be like, N-word, but not N-word, get off the stoop.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, what the fuck? It's like New York City. What are you doing? This isn't Alabama. And then, okay, so, but that's like few and far between, that kind of overt kind of, racial, George Floyd type thing. It's usually hidden. In Israel, it's right up front all the time. So
Yep.
like at the checkpoints in the old city, if you're a tourist, if you're an American tourist, you go to the old city of Jerusalem, fascinating place, amazing. But there's these checkpoints like all over the place between the different quarters.
Yep.
And the way that the Israeli soldiers treat Palestinians who are just, basically it's like going through, it's dystopian. They have their stuff on a metal detector. They're searched and patted down. The IDs are checked. The way that they're treated roughly, contemptuously, like, it's disgusting. And it's like, and it's all the time. It's grinding all the time.
And
it's
as an
hard for
American,
Americans to understand just how bad it is.
and as an American, you can walk on through. I remember going there, and there was one line for me, and there was another line for Palestinians.
Right.
That line was way in the back, and for me, just walk on through.
Yeah, they have the dog. They have the dog line. It's bad. Yeah,
It's wild. I remember being in one of the cars, and they pulled the bus driver over, and apparently the guy didn't have the proper identification. And they're very polite. They speak English. Many of them are Americans.
Oh, sure.
And they
a lot of Brooklynites,
Yeah, I met a woman from Brooklyn. I had to go to. I have to control fluid, and I use saunas sometimes to do so. And going to one of the saunas, when the woman realized I was American, she said, "Oh yeah, I'm from Brooklyn." And my ex-wife didn't quite get it until we were leaving. And I was like, "Why do you think there's soldiers on the bus? Why do you think all these people got guns? Why do you think that woman is from Brooklyn? She's taking somebody's spot that lives there." Like, it's a wild dystopian place. Very nice if you're not Palestinian. Like, it's hard. Like, it is so weird, right? Because it's like when you're dealing with them, Israelis are very nice to Americans and to maybe other tourists. Palestinians is different. Like, I remember this Jewish mother, when she heard I was going to Nepal, she was freaking out. "Oh my God, I don't want you to die. I'm going to die. I've had a friend," like worried deeply about me. And it's like, okay, but it is a bizarre place. I put it that way. It's just a very bizarre place.
It's very strange. And there's also, there's also some aspects to it. They're very isolated by, for example, their language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they've resurrected this completely dead language, Hebrew. Nobody really even knows what Hebrew sounded like when it was actually spoken 2,000 years ago, because nobody's spoken it all that time. So that was resurrected by the Zionists. So now they speak, and I think it was almost a political decision to resurrect. I mean, they could have used German or Russian, right, or Yiddish, but instead they created, these people all speak the national language, and it's totally useless, right? No one around the world speaks it at all. Yeah. Some people speak Yiddish, but not Hebrew. So
many of those were
literally
Russians.
They're all completely siloed, and they don't even know how they're perceived in the rest of the world.
They have to know. Oh, they know. Oh, they know. And the reason why I say they know, when I was traveling, I remember I was being in Nepal. There's a chip on their shoulder about how they're perceived.
That's true.
In my experience, where there's always this thing of, I need to explain. I need to justify. The guy, I remember
my white Afrikaner girlfriend was like that in college.
Yeah.
It was the early 80s. And she was like, "You have to understand, we treat our servants very well." I'm like, "Listen to yourself."
Yep. Yeah. I remember they were trying to explain to me why they were destroying olive branches and destroying crops and everything else associated with it. And I was like, "Dude,
we have to."
Yeah, they're like, "We have to." It feels like King Leopold's soliloquy, where he's describing all of these crimes that he's forced to do because of the population, despite the fact that you're subjugating a population. It is a wild place. I guess my point is, they are literally committing a genocide. And the best that Walsh can come up with is, we would have somehow been different. And what I don't think he fully grasped is that he grasped that the people don't believe him. B, he can't articulate how he would be different than Donald Trump. Like you said, maybe not disciplining students.
What is the cost to him to say, look, he's not going to be vice president ever. So he's achieved peak Walls, right? That's where he is right now on the Chris Hayes show as a senator from Minnesota, right? That's it. Or governor. I apologize. So like he could just lie and say, oh yeah, under a Harris-Walz administration, we would have cut off all weapons to Israel. He could say that, but the fact that he can't even say that because, he'd be getting a call from the DNC, Mike, what the fuck? Like, like he can't even do that.
You're gonna hurt our cash, man. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Like, yeah, I just got a call from J Street. It's not good. Stop.
It's outrageous. Like there's such a disconnect from where the American public is on this issue versus where Congress is.
It's going to get wider. It's going to get wider because Americans are very slow to pay attention to to anything overseas, no matter how outrageous it is. But if it drags on over the course of years, which is what we're talking about now, they start to pay attention. They focus on it. They notice it. It's sort of like it's in the background. It's like on their social media feeds. It's like it's just in the ether, like apartheid. Like apartheid. And then at a certain point, people are just like, oh man, enough. Just stop. That's how Americans are. And so I think, Washington and like we in the media, we kind of operate on a different timeline than the public does. But they're catching up now.
But it was present in the election. I guess is my point. Like,
well, it affected enough of the vote to get people to sit on their hands, right?
Yes. I mean, Kamala Harris lost by 1.5 million votes, give or take. Okay, well, you had millions.
7 to 10 million
didn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember randomly going into the pot store, talking to an African American woman where she was like, I don't like what they're doing over there. I am considering just not voting.
Mm-hmm.
That woman was 60 years old. Random meeting where this came up just in conversation in the context of the store. And you think to yourself, okay, well, what does this look like across a country of 320 million people where the youth are engaged in this issue heavily engaged, for God's sake, at the college campuses.
And that's super influential. I mean, I knew older people who said that they would have voted for Harris. And even though their kid probably may or may not have voted anyway, because, kids aren't that good at voting. But they were so, these older people, these parents were impacted by their kids. And they were like, when I really started to focus on what my kid was saying, I was like, I can't vote for Harris.
Yep.
Or Trump.
My mom was like that with Bernie Sanders. It affected her. It affected my grandmother. It affected relatives. Like, I was so engaged.
I don't think Democrats think about that sort of. They're like, well, young people don't vote. Well, I mean, they vote. They just don't vote in this high numbers. But it's like, but I don't think they understand the spillover effect. It's sort of like a business. If a business meets, an airline, I don't know, XYZ airline mistreats you, then you come on the air here and tell about your experience.
Right.
Suddenly, like thousands of people know about it. And so, and then they're like, oh my God, so, JT said this. And it's like, oh shit. And so, like, it affects, and then like next time they buy a ticket, they're like, yeah, maybe I'll go with a different airline. I mean, there's a big effect.
Or do you think they're making the calculus that they don't care? I mean, they have to know that.
Well, they don't care. That's clearly true. But maybe they should care because even just out of self-preservation, they're being dumb. They should care.
But they seem to be willing to lose. As opposed to
look at Columbia University, my alma mater. They are willing to lose. I mean, literally, what did they do? They basically sold their soul for a seat at the table, and they got nothing back at all. I mean, this is just it's not just bad ethics, right? To say, for example, like, you shouldn't be on the side of a genocide. You shouldn't be willing to give up academic freedom. That's true. Those things are very true. But it's also just like, what's in it for you personally to be, Israel's bitch? And the answer is there's nothing in it really for us. I mean, just think about, like, for example, let's just say, to be really raw about it, we're talking to Iran now. Let's say the Iranians said, we're going to need you to cut Israel loose so we can have normalized relations. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, we're like, all right, we'll do that. Well, that trade-off, I mean, what would you rather have as your friend in the Middle East? Iran or tiny little Israel with no oil, no natural resources, the size of New Jersey, a worthless geographic location that causes you nothing but trouble and costs you billions of dollars a year. Or Iran, a massive oil producing state right on the Persian Gulf, smack dab between the former Soviet Union, Afghanistan, all sorts of strategically important places, the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, you tell me which it would be better geopolitically if you're playing that game of risk. Which one would you rather have? Israel is not worth it.
Well, from their point of view, it's a colony, just like we were a colony.
Mm-hmm.
They're expanding and wiping out the population, just like we wiped out the population.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that we have a certain level of control in regards to them expanding into the various regions, meaning we don't control Iran. I mean, for God's sake, we had a coup in Iran so we can put the Shah in. So we have some level of control in regards to the way politics work in Iran. So I think from their point of view, this is our little colony. This colony is kind of like us. And because this colony
was it
is kind of
Truman
like
who said Israel is like an aircraft carrier in the Middle East?
Yep.
But it's like, but I don't know I still stick to my calculus. I would rather have all those Arab countries, and Iran, than to have Israel. I just don't. Israel's just not important, and the only thing that they have is a very vibrant tech and surveillance sector.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm pretty sure we could replicate that. Hell, we could make friends with the Chinese and use their tech. I mean,
we can build it. Yeah. No, look. You have my full agreement. That is clearly not the way they see it, and there is a lot of money that is coming from Israel. Those people should be under FARA. Let's be very honest.
True.
The notion that they can function and not be considered under FARA laws as a foreign agent when their sole and only focus, even to the detriment of America itself, is Israel. But again, if you're paying Donald Trump $100 million, or you're paying all of these people all of this money all throughout Congress. Thomas Massey came out and said they have minders in Congress for each of the Congress members to ensure that they vote a particular way. That is astonishing. That's a level of control that is very problematic. And for all of this talk about the Russians are doing this, the Russians are doing that. Trump is a Russian agent. Dude, he is are you out of your mind in regard to the comparison of control of the government and the direction that the United States is going?
If he's a Russian agent, he's the worst Russian agent ever.
Yes. Agreed. 1,000% agree. I'm glad you brought up Columbia because I want to go to Harvard for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to Harvard. Shout out to Harvard. Effectively telling Trump to F off. And I was going through that story this morning. For one, the idea that a U.S. president is effectively trying to shape the mindset. This is, what is it, Operation Mockingbird on a lower level that is just not as effective. It's just a blunt version of it.
Wasn't it Goebbels or someone like that who said the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world? That's what this is about. It's like Hitler Youth, right? Or Young Pioneers, or any of those kind of things.
But you got to get those people at 6 years old, not at 20, when they're freaking out at campuses. Right here. Now I'll show the article. Trump is effectively freezing $2.2 billion. But let's be clear, Harvard
They've got it.
Extremely rich, ridiculously rich.
They've got 50 billion.
Yeah. So the freezing of 2.2 billion, okay. However, effectively says, look, we're not changing it. We're not adjusting the way we go about it, what we want. They are even filing lawsuits, effectively saying, the Trump administration is trying to keep money from us that we are supposed to have. We don't accept the premise on this. Shout out to Harvard. I guess my thing is, when you're looking at this and you're looking at what Trump is trying to do to these universities, this is disturbing. I mean, you're disappearing people, for one. There's that. You're taking people who are going to college and sending them to some other country because they decide to complain or write an article when they were younger, either bad-mouthing America or bad-mouthing Israel. So you're doing this at the behest of a foreign government. That makes it even worse. And to do this across the board, looking at each and every person's either social media or for that matter, anything that they might have put out, even protests. I mean, some of these people weren't even the right people, and they still said, take them away anyway. Let's take them away. I've never seen this. I mean, have you seen this in, like, even McCarthyism? I don't think.
Well, I did look this up. I was working on a column about like how a lot of stuff that Trump's done is not without antecedents. And so basically, it's true that there are some precursors to this. During we mentioned South Africa, there was the mid 1980s college divestment movement. I was part of that, urging colleges and universities to divest from apartheid era South Africa. The INS under Ronald Reagan went after foreign students and in some cases got rid of their student visas and deported them back to their respective countries.
Really?
There were Richard Nixon also, was really furious at the radical movement on college campuses and across the country. He also had he targeted students at UC Berkeley and other colleges, and foreign students in particular, stripped them of their student visas, had them deported. This seems to be a level of viciousness that is higher, like the Shalom Mahmoud, message being sent out from social media, but the scale seems to be higher. And certainly, for example, the ruthlessness of luring someone to a hearing where they're supposedly going to be approved for their citizenship application and then arresting them on the spot instead. That's kind of new, but it's not without these things are not without precedent. I mean, it all makes the argument for slippery slopes, right? Like these things were allowed to happen. There was really no real political accountability for them in the past. And, I know for a fact that guys like Stephen Miller, they're cognizant of these historical, precedents. So I think they looked back and they're like, okay, we can use these things. These things have been done before. If they didn't know it, they can hire, a clerk to research it and find out what I found out. And so is this different? Yeah, it's different, but it's not novel, I guess is my point. It's bigger. It's like they're building on the past.
Well, I will tell you this. Biden's anti-Semitism person, right here, anti-Semitism envoy, quote, I'm not coming down right smack dab in the middle. I don't oppose many of the things that are being done. I just wish they were done more deftly. Biden's person. Again, the Democrats are not that far away from where Trumpism is.
Oh, not at all.
But that's my point. That's my point, right? It's like they have to move. They've lost the plot. If the objective is to win elections, they've lost the plot. And maybe in their mind, okay, there's a lot of money that we're going to get. The public's not going to like us, but both parties are doing it. But what they don't quite get is that on the Republican side, it's about 50-50. On the Democratic side, it might be 30-70, right? Like it is, the energy on this is really coming from the left, not necessarily the right. Even if you look on social media, the energy is coming from the left, not necessarily the right. Those people would be more inclined to vote Democrat and I will tell you something else. From their point of view and from my point of view, it's a genocide. And the notion, it's like if somebody said, I'm going to build 2 concentration camps. And somebody else said, well, I'm only going to build 1. With the notion that, well, me building 1 concentration camp is somehow better than you building 2. Hey, dude, both of those things are horrible. I'm not voting for either of those things. Right. You may win, but you're going to win without my vote. And I will wager to you, a lot of people feel the exact same way.
That's how I feel. I feel like you assholes in the 2 parties, you can do whatever the fuck you want, but you're not doing it with my support.
Right there. Right there. That's my feel. That's exactly my feeling. I want to go to another issue. This is creating a drag on Donald Trump. And the tariff war is one of those things that is doing it, where the American public is like, Trump has lost his fucking mind. And he is hurting us. The notion that he's going to put 25% tariff on pharmaceuticals. Okay, we're going to pay that. We already pay more than anybody else for drugs. And he's going with this idea, well, they're going to move drug manufacturing into the United States. Okay, I don't know how many years it's going to take. You're going to be out of office in 3. I
I
don't
was
know how
going to
many
say
years.
this might work if Donald Trump was 35 and was going to be president for life, and then and you're a pharmaceutical maker, and you're like or a automaker, whatever, and you're thinking, oh, okay, well, I can get all the necessary approvals, and I'll be up and running in 6 years, and I'll make that money. But that's not the case.
Yep.
Donald Trump will not be president in a few years. Even if he tries to stay in, he's going to die because he's 1 million years old.
Yes.
So then, President Vance, let's say, is not likely to continue these policies. So if you're a capitalist, an entrepreneur who's thinking about looking at the landscape and say, is there an opportunity here for me to make money by manufacturing in the United States? The answer is it's too uncertain. You can't. It's just money. You can't. It's not emotional. I think Donald Trump. I think these policies would have been incredibly useful in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s to protect American jobs. I would have been all for them. It's just too late. It's gone. Those facilities are gone. I'm so sympathetic to his feelings when he's seen the same, boarded up factories that I grew up next to. It makes my blood boil with rage what happened.
50 years ago, he would have had.
But there's nothing you can do about it now. You gotta this is what happens when an old man is president. He's not forward looking. He's not able to see what a different future could look like.
50 years ago, he would have had me. Yeah. Meaning when all of this started, if he would have said, I'm going to protect our drug industry, I'm going to protect this industry, I'm going to protect, fair enough. That is not where we are. And the way the American political system runs, the policies that you're going to put in place are going to hurt a lot of people, and those people are going to vote all of their life. This is
like when Democrats say, like, oh, we're going to protect unions. I'm like, 8% or 7% of the public belongs to a union. Who cares? Unions are gone. Unions are dead. Unions don't matter anymore. Okay, you can protect those. I mean, but it's like, please protect those who are left, I guess. But it's not like what would be more important would be to protect ways for people to join and form unions.
Exactly.
I mean, people in white collar jobs who are not able to form unions.
Agreed. 1000% agreed.
And government workers. Get rid of Taft-Hartley.
There are a lot of people in my audience that believes that Trump is doing this for them. And as I keep trying to point out to them, you are going to be injured by this. And by the way, a drug company, if you break your knee, you need a drug, you're going to have to get the drug, whether it's 25% higher or 25% less. If you're on cancer, you're going to have to get that drug, whether it's 25% higher, 25% less.
Right.
I am highly doubtful that the pharmaceutical companies are going to be like, oh, he's putting 25% tariffs, so we're going to move. Drugs and medicines aren't typically one of those things that you can just opt out of. Oh, I'm just going to opt out of insulin. Okay, you can do that. Good luck with that. I don't know how far that's going to get you. Maybe you can use diet. But many of these things aren't things you can opt out of. It's not like I'm just not going to buy a car. It's a drug. You need it. And so the American public is going to flip when their prices go up, and B, as Republicans simultaneously put $20 trillion on the debt with voodoo math in order to make it look as if they didn't put $20 trillion on the debt. And we are paying for that, meaning we are going to have to pay those higher tariffs, even on things like tomatoes, where he's like, I'm putting 20% tariffs on tomatoes from Mexico. Okay, again, all of these are costs that we are going to have to end up paying. Not to mention he's in a trade war with China that he has no way to extricate himself out of. And now he's looking for other countries to lump together to help him to gang up on China when he's alienated all of the allies of the United States, many of which at this point are even looking to China for help. So the polling from CNN came out on Donald Trump up to this point.
Oh, yeah.
Precipitous,
I'm glad you brought this up.
Precipitous drop. I'm going to play the clip from the guy. This is CNN. This guy is very animated whenever he does this stuff.
Is that Joaquin Phoenix?
I don't. He looks like him, don't it? All right, I'm going to play the clip. God, I have such a crush on this woman. I'm sorry, I do. I don't even know her name. God, I think she's so attractive. She is the. I'm sorry. I'm being a. I'm
She's
being a
like
guy.
younger, hotter Melania.
I don't
From the
know. It's
side.
something about her. But we're being guys, and this is going to be considered misogynistic. So I'm going to go past this.
Right.
I'm going to play the clip. This is Donald Trump numbers. Some of these numbers are disastrous.
Yeah, we'll focus in on independents here, and independents feel that Donald Trump has vacated the center of the electorate, catering to his base. What are we talking about? Well, let's talk about the overall net approval ratings. We're going to look at the worst ever at this point in a presidency. The old record among independents for the worst ever was Donald Trump back in 2016, a net approval rating of minus 16 points. Well, Donald Trump has broken his own record here. He now holds, in this particular term, the worst ever net approval rating at this point in a presidency among independents at, get this, minus 22 points. He is 22 points underwater with independents. That breaks the old record that belonged to Trump. He has set the new record. He is completely underwater with the center of the electorate, Kate Ball.
And this is overall. This
Yes.
is on all the issues. Now, focus in specifically on the economy.
Yeah, let's focus in on the economy, right? What is driving this overall approval rating for Donald Trump among independents to go underwater? Let's take a look at the economy, and let's take a look at Trump's net approval rating on, and look at the trend line over just the last few months. You go back to January, he was slightly above water among independents at plus 1 point. Look at this drop, Kate. Oh my, minus 20.
Negative 29.
30-point loss.
The economy is the thing that got Trump elected in many respects.
Yeah.
I mean, Democrats wanted to keep the war going. People didn't necessarily like it. They trusted him on it. But the economy was the thing that over and over and over again, people would say, well, we think he's a businessman. He'll do better with the economy. We think he'll do better with the economy. I have more money in my pocket when Donald Trump was president. He's going to do better with the economy. 29 points among independents. That is astonishing.
It's not to me, though, because this was a bait and switch. Like, if in the same poll, they said he's still, the only bright spot for him is how the voters feel about him, about the border crisis, right?
Yeah.
They agree with that. Sadly, they agree with his approach. But that's because he basically did what he said he was going to do on the on the border. So, when you do what you say you're going to do, the voters tend to approve. He didn't do that with the economy at all. I mean, he said he was going to prioritize job growth and reduce inflation. And then he turns around. I mean, he had certainly mentioned that he liked tariffs, but he had never been specific about it. He hadn't been, the messaging had not been consistent or as strident as the rest of it. So people really thought this is going to be a war against inflation, and it's going to be a war for more and better jobs. And then, the president seems to have lost interest in that. And, and now he's off on his tariff war. And
I disagree. But please, I'm sorry. No, please, I'm sorry.
So it's a bait and switch, right? I mean, that's why people are so pissed. It's like, I voted for this. It's kind of like, I voted for a steak au poivre. And, and what the fuck are these fish sticks doing out here on my plate? I mean, it's like, get rid of that.
If I'm the kind Donald Trump, in his mind, he may think he's doing just that.
He does. He does think that.
In his mind,
work, but it's not going to work quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the voters, they have bills that are due quickly.
Yes. When they are like, oh my God, eggs. I'm only getting one in the package for $20. Right? Or I buy a pack of Doritos and there's like 4 in a huge bag of it. And they're like, what the hell is this? Right?
Yeah.
When they go to the hospital, when they go to the store, when they buy products, and all that stuff goes up in price. And they're like, what the fuck is this? What is he doing? He's having a trade war with the world.
That's what this is. That's exactly what this is. Yeah. It would be like if you elected President Bernie Sanders and then he didn't give a shit about Medicare.
Right. Right. It's like, what about the minimum wage? Yeah, we'll get to it. Right.
Yeah, we don't care. Yeah, whatever. Later.
He is going to wipe out the Republican Congress. That's my prediction.
I think
He's going to wipe out the Republican Congress. And it's going to be the situation where people are like, we didn't vote for this. You have people who are online now.
If the Democrats can successfully nationalize the election,
Well, that's the catch.
They don't have a Newt Gingrich in 1994 with a contract with America and all that stuff.
But I
He
strongly
nationalized that election. That's hard to do in midterms because people aren't really voting based on they vote for their specific congressperson or their specific senator.
Oh, I so disagree on this one because Trump is ubiquitous. Like when I'm doing my show, I try to look for, okay, what are the big stories?
Mhm.
He's everywhere.
That's true.
There's no way to get away from him. Like
No.
any time he's on I remember one time.
I mean, it could be like 1974 after Watergate, with Republican, it was a rout, and every Republican lost, and it was just because, like what you're saying. I mean, people were just so pissed. They're like, I don't care. I'm voting. I'm pissed at the party of Nixon. So it could be like that. Totally.
Well, Democrats are going to say this guy's in lockstep with Trump, and they're going to go down the list. He's in lockstep with Trump. He's in lockstep with Trump, and for the most part, they are. They've fallen in line, and because they've fallen in line so steadily and so readily, even on issues.
Trump needs a win. I mean, he knows this, right? He knows this instinctively. He's 3 months in. There's been no wins. I mean, now granted, Joe Biden only had one win. It was the infrastructure bill. He had to wait about 7-9 months for that, right? But Trump needs a win, and I don't know where he's going to get it. If it's going to be in Ukraine, or it's not going to be on the economy. I don't think.
Not in the way that he's going, especially not with the war with China. China is like, we are going to fight this to the bitter end. And to make it even worse, he is out here saying just insane stuff that doesn't make sense. I mean, look, I have no issue with him going after Zelensky. I think that's the funniest thing in the world. But when China has already said, we are going to fight this to the bitter end. Like, meaning we are not pulling away from this. This is a fight for
and they can't, because they have a capitalist society with socialist controls.
Yep.
So they can completely mobilize their entire country toward this economic end, this war.
I was looking for the clip where he's in an interview, and in the interview, he's talking about tariffs, and he's right here. It's so whacked out. And the idea that he feels comfortable in saying this aloud is pretty astonishing to me, but
About
maybe it shouldn't be astonishing.
1870.
Income tax?
You're the only one that's asked me that. Oh, I deal with all these big financial geniuses. Nobody ever. There is a chance that the money from tariffs could be so great that it would replace. In the old days, about 1870 to 1913, the tariffs were the only form of money. And that's when our nation was relatively the richest. We were the richest.
Income.
What do I do with that? 1870, as if the economy today is somehow equivalent to 1870. And I disagree with him. I mean, if you're talking about when the economy was booming, you're talking about like under FDR, where there was like a 99% income tax rate on everything up to a certain point. And then after that point, they get like $1. Like, that is not, that is a whacked out take.
Also, it ain't true. Okay.
Yeah.
So there was the Panic of 1893 that he's conveniently forgetting about, which was a depression that was bigger than the Great Depression of the 1930s. Worse, grinding, disastrous, catastrophic. So, and also, what's the difference really between our economy and, I mean, obviously, we have cars, we rode horses, if we had been lucky enough to have a horse. But I mean, there was still, effectively, there was Jim Crow. I mean, it was a completely different country, like much smaller. But I mean, the big difference is that the modern income tax that was created by Cordell Hull, future Secretary of State under FDR and during World War II, it turned the U.S. into a global powerhouse, right? It turned the U.S. as an exceptional, big imperialist power. That's from the income tax. You couldn't. There just isn't enough money pouring into federal coffers to take over the Philippines when you're, with tariffs. And actually, you could argue that might be a good thing. But I don't think it's a good thing from from Trump's point of view, right? Like, no, you're not going to find the money there. Right now, tariffs account for between 1% and 2% of all federal revenues, right? It's like, it's also a super regressive tax, right?
Yep.
So everybody pays the same, whether they're Elon Musk or they're Ted Rall. So, and like the problem there is, as society the disparity between rich and poor increases, poor people can't afford to pay as much as they used to be able to afford. So, if we had a growing middle class, if that were not the case, you might be able to, go with a regressive taxation scheme, but you can't. There's just no, it's kind of like, Willie Sutton said, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do you tax rich people? Because that's where the money is. It's like, there's no money. It's like, this is just like, it's just not going to work. It's not even ideology. He just doesn't know that he's being poorly advised.
And by the way, $36 trillion in debt, with $2 trillion in debt added on to it each year. We're like, the tariffs wouldn't even pay for the $2 trillion in debt each year that, that we're building up. I mean, and yet he would say,
and our interest rates are going to go up on that debt because of this tariff war, the weakened dollar, and the capital flight away from treasury bonds and notes. I mean, we've never seen a scenario where you have the stock market, the dollar, and T-bills and T-notes all falling at the same time. Normally, if there's an inverse relationship between those things.
Right. People go to the treasury bonds when they feel something is going on in the world because they believe the U.S. is a stable actor. Yeah. And in this case, it was the opposite. Not only were they selling those bonds, nobody was buying them. It is a mind-blowing scenario that he is effectively creating. I know you used to be in the banking industry. I keep saying that this is going to create stagflation. And the reason I say it, I'm not an economist, so we're going to take it with a grain of salt, right? If we are going to have to pay higher things, meaning what they are crafting right now, the Republican Party is crafting a bill. They are trying to cut nearly $1 trillion out of Medicare. I think it was like $800 billion or some insane amount that they're calling waste and fraud and abuse, in the way that George Bush used to call torture enhanced interrogation, right? And they're doing that in order to give themselves a gigantic tax cut and enshrine the tax cuts that Donald Trump already had into law. So not only is he putting a largest tax increase from these tariffs on the American public that we've seen in God knows how long, at the very least in my modern era, they are giving themselves a huge amount of money simultaneously. And so all of those things are taking place in regards to the dollar. They're expecting zero growth, if not a recession, and people are going to be paying higher prices for typical things that they ordinarily buy. This is, again, simultaneously with them giving themselves massive amounts of money. That is astonishing. That's mind-blowing. That is his policy.
I agree.
I just outrageous. I don't.
Well, they can still turn it. They have time to turn it around.
But they're not.
But I don't see any hope for that because they have such a bunch of weird ass ideologues sitting at the table, right? I mean, There's no one. I mean, you would have thought he would have brought in some lefties, just team of rivals, just to mix it up a little bit. I mean, if I were president, I'd have some Milton Friedman types at my table. They wouldn't be the majority, but I'd have a few just in case. I'd want to hear what they had to say.
No, not him. He is Peter Navarro. And,
oh my God, the idiot.
And
Elon Musk was right when he said that guy's as dumb as a bag of rocks. He's right about that.
And according to the Wall Street Journal, this is haphazard. Like, this is not sensible. We got a plan. We're going into this. We know exactly what we're going to do. We've plotted. It's not that. And they've even pointed out, it says some 70% of countries currently negotiating with tariff relief with the U.S. should approach China as a group together with Washington Treasury Secretary Scott Benson said last week. Other U.S. officials suggest joint efforts to starve China's modern technologies and trade opportunities. So effectively, they're saying, okay, we're now in a trade war with China that we can't get out because China has effectively not called and they've escalated. So we're not getting your airlines. We're not taking your beef. We're not taking your soy or whatever grain. And so he has to, once again, pay farmers because China, 1.5, 1.3 billion people, is not taking the grain coming out the United States, not taking the airlines from Boeing, not meaning China is effectively saying, we will get these products somewhere else. We don't need these products from you. We will find somewhere else. And so he's now in a position where he's like, okay, I need to find people to help me with this. You've alienated Europe. You've effectively called them vassals. You've sent Vance over there to wag the finger at them and effectively browbeat them. You've pissed them off on the issue of Ukraine. You've pissed them off on the issue of Greenland, as you keep saying you're going to effectively take Greenland to the point where Greenland says they're going to work with China. You've pissed off, what was the other one? Panama. Like, meaning you've gone around the world pissing off people. And now you need those people to try to help you in a trade war that you can't extricate yourself from. And they point all of this out. And one of the other parts, right here, this is the other part. When I was having a conversation with Alex, and Alex said, well, I don't know if this is something that he is planning out. And I played this clip because I think this clip is damning. When Trump is being asked about this was, I think, last week. Listen to what he says here. This is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Larger companies who get hit hard in the market days during this 90 days.
As time goes by, we're going to take a look. There are some that have been hard. There are some that, by the nature of the company, get hit a little bit harder, and we'll take a look at that. Yeah. Instinctively, more than anything else.
That instinctively, more than anything else, we're doing this on the fly.
Yeah.
We're doing this on the fly.
It's the Trump way.
I know, Ted, but how do you get into a trade war that you can't pull out of? Because the country
I think what's happened here, I mean, look, unfortunately, it's also two men, right? President Xi and President Trump, who both have sort of similar models, right? They represent themselves as strong men for large countries that feel aggrieved and disrespected over the years. And they, basically President Xi is the make China great again guy. And so,
But he has.
And he has.
I mean, they put like 800 million people out of poverty.
Well, that's right. And they've built, and building on his predecessors, right? I mean, I think it reminds me a lot of like when you read about the build up to World War II, and Hitler's advisors said, hey, listen, Führer, I've been to the United States. You don't want to provoke them to get into the war. They're a sleeping giant, but if they go to war, their industrial capacity is unbelievable, and we will not be able to withstand it. Hitler had never traveled much, and he had never been to the U.S. He had no idea, and he didn't get it. He just didn't. He basically, once he went after the Soviets and the Americans, he bit off more than he could chew, right? And I think that's what's happened here. I know Trump's been to China, but I don't think he gets it. I don't think he understands that China is not the China of his childhood, right? Which was poor and backwards and in trying to recover from civil war. It's not those things anymore. It's an industrial colossus, and it's their world now, not ours. And I don't think he gets that.
One last point. China has been aggrieved. Like the way that the U.S. talks to other countries, we talk down to them. Even Europe. When Vance goes, he talks to them like a child, right? These are grown-ass men. And even when he's telling them in the news, like, you guys need to not be vassals. We don't want you to be vassals. Okay, well, that means you're vassals. It's like, I don't want you to be something. It's effectively an indictment that you are vassals. When they're talking to China and they're talking from this imperial position, and China tells them, who the F are you? You're not the boss of me. Like, you're not going to treat me as if I'm one of your European colonies that you're, deindustrializing. We're equals. Full stop.
Yeah, you're not carving the Chinese melon like the Brits in the 1800s. Sorry. It's not. Those days are over.
Ted Rall, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, host of Too Much Information, TMI, with the great, the beautiful, the awesome Manila Chan, comes on at 10 a.m. Check him out immediately after this show goes off. Ted, man, I always appreciate these conversations.
Me too.
Your historical knowledge is just fantastic.
It's always fun.
Have a good one, man. Be safe.
All right. Take care, Jamal.
Thank you. Ted Rall is fantastic. I remember, and I always think calling him political cartoon syndicated columnist doesn't do him justice. Like if you hear him, I remember on the radio station, and the first time he goes into historical context, and I'm sitting there like, whoa, we need to change his bio. This is fantastic. The fact that he knows that stuff. I didn't tell Ted what we were talking about in advance, by the way. The historical context, he just knew it. The notion where you can go through president after president after president, you can name exactly what they were doing. You can tell exactly what was going on at the time period. Just astonishing, astonishing. As I said, we need to change his bio because it does not entirely reflect how awesome Ted is. To dig into the China thing for a moment, when I say China has no F's to give, and they're looking at this as this is a fight for primacy, meaning you started a war in Ukraine that you now can't get out of, that you're going to lose. And that's going to be very clear that you lost. And it's going to be so clear that you lost because any deal that you make is going to be, for the most part, on Russian terms in the context of Ukraine, even though you may make this larger deal in regards to Europe and security architecture and all of the other stuff. What's coming out of China is defiance, pure, unadulterated, ruthless defiance. We are fighting for primacy, economic primacy. You're not the boss of us. You started a fight that you can't win. This is the guy from Macau that I was telling you about. Listen to what he says.
美国依然对香港如此加征关税，简直是蛮横霸道、无耻之极。这让世人更加看清，美国见不得香港好，是破坏香港人权、自由、法治秩序。和繁荣稳定的最大黑手，让美国那些乡巴佬们在中华民族5000年文明面前去哀鸣吧！
The problem is that in this scenario, to use your metaphor, the US has the bigger gun, and so China ends up having more to lose from this trade war, doesn't it? You know, it can't sustain the loss of 15% of its export market, i.e., what you export to the US.
Not at all. China is fully prepared to fight to the very end because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out from the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States.
Flat out, we don't care. We don't care. And apparently the audio was gone for the other one. KJ, give me 1 second. I do want to play this guy's clip. Right here. At the end of this statement, he points out, he says, let those American peasants wail before the 5,000-year-old civilization of the Chinese nation. That is where they are. That's where they are. Outright, complete defiance. They are not doing this in the context of, okay, we're going to have a conversation with Trump. We're going to make this is a fight for supremacy. KJ, no. Welcome to the show, my man. I'm sorry. It's not muted now. It was muted before, but I got it. No, 5,000 years is the point that the guy was making. And they keep making that point. We have been here for 5,000 years. Okay, I don't know what that was. He said, we've been here for 5,000 years. We don't care. That's their take. Welcome to the show, KJ. How you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing well. Happy to be with you.
Thank you, man. I'm happy to have you. KJ he's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. He's now available at iacenter.org. Also, KJ, what network are you on? What show are you on? At what time does that show come on?
I'm on the Breakthrough News Network on YouTube. The show is called The China Report, and they just released a show yesterday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern.
Fantastic. Definitely check it out. KJ, anybody that has seen KJ, he's a fan favorite here. The audience loves you, KJ. You are one of the most thoughtful people that we've come across to talk about this subject matter. And so I have always appreciated you coming on. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
I have been fascinated by what seems to be a trade war that Trump can't extricate himself out of. And for whatever reason, he seemed to have this belief that China was going to come kowtowing to him for a deal. And up to this point, even the Wall Street Journal, they point out China hasn't called because China's not going to call. In fact, just to give the top bar for the Wall Street Journal article, because it's a fascinating article that gets across, Trump doesn't know effectively what he is doing. He is looking now to other countries to help him out, countries, by the way, that he's fully alienated, in order to bail him out of this mess, with the idea that, well, maybe we can gang up on China and get China to come to the table. So right here, this is a piece from the Wall Street Journal. It says, America needs its allies and partners for what is shaping up as a protracted contest for geopolitical primacy. Now that President Trump has unleashed a trade war against China, there are no rush, or there's no one that is rushing. Oh, I'm sorry. They are in no rush to take sides. So effectively, all right, we're now in a trade war with China. Okay, we don't know how to get out this trade war with China. We need people to help us fight China in this economic battle. Nobody is in a rush to go to either side in this. And yet, what you've seen is Xi Jinping going to Malaysia, going to Vietnam. He's shoring up support from some of these countries. Europe is effectively going there in July. I would imagine they're going to have a conversation about trade relationships. There's talk about removing some of the tariffs associated with their automobiles going into Europe, meaning creating a trade relationship between China. In this sense, Greenland has effectively said they want to move closer to China on this. The transatlantic relationship has been strained, to put it mildly, broken, depending upon other sources that you read. I mean, for God's sake, they're saying when you go to the US, you have to take telephones because they don't trust the US now. And China seems to be in this to win it. As the guy pointed out in the BBC thing, we don't care. China has done airlines, meaning we're no longer buying Boeing, not buying beef from the United States. Apparently, Trump is going to have to give farmers money to keep the farms open because China apparently is getting that stuff from other places. This is across the board where China is escalating this, where Trump had to effectively back down on his tariffs, but they dropped them to 10%. And then on top of that, had to effectively leave out electronics, 3/4 of which come out of China. And one last point before I bring you in. This story came out, wow, where is it? It was going for the economic data for this right here, first quarter GDP. Look at these numbers that China is putting on the board. 5.4% growth. Momentum continues amid tough worries. And from my understanding, the Chinese stock market is not collapsing in the way that the US stock market is. Give me your take, KJ. China is escalating this. They're not backing down.
You know, the Chinese have said that they're open to dialogue, but only if they are treated with respect. And I think Trump has kind of thrown that out the window. He says that, you know, people have to kiss my ass before I'll have a dialogue with them. You know, and that's almost as bad as saying that he's going to grab their genitals, right? So it's just like, on a geopolitical standpoint, it's just a catastrophe. Like, he's going to have to eat those words or he's not going to have a deal. But the Chinese are standing strong. And as you and I have discussed, they have a strong position. You know, the US thinks that China is weak. because it does more trade with the US than exports more to the US than vice versa. But as I have pointed out, for every dollar that China makes when it exports something to the United States, the US makes $7. So if China loses $1, the US will lose $7. That's according to Nassim Taleb, whose figures are probably pretty good. And then the other thing that Foreign Affairs magazine has pointed out is that what China essentially gets from the United States is money, and money is fungible. You can get money from other places. You can increase your QE. You can do all kinds of macroeconomic adjustments to increase money supply. But what the United States gets from China are tangible goods, specific goods, finished goods, intermediary goods, etc. But it cannot readily get those goods from other places, including rare earth metals, which are almost impossible. The heavy ones, almost impossible. And this is why the United States, after having imposed a 145% tariff on China, said, oops, we're going to take that back, and we're going to exempt semiconductors. Now, Jamal, you're a chess player, right? You know that when somebody makes a move and they say, oh, I take my move back, you know what that means, right?
Well, they made a bad move, right?
If they made a bad move, you're dealing with an amateur, right? They don't know what.
Oh, can I take that back? Can I take that back? No. Usually, no, you can't. You're playing a game, right?
Well, I mean, the U.S. has taken back two moves, right? First, it imposed, massive tariffs on everybody, including the penguins on McDonald Island. What have they ever done to us? And then the U.S. has said, so, we've stayed those tariffs for 90 days. Now, get this. If you want to renegotiate those tariffs, you have 85 days to negotiate with 180 countries. There isn't enough time in the bureaucrats' calendars to negotiate that. So that's going to have to be extended anyway, right? Or they're going to have to dial it back in some fashion. So first, that's not going to work. And then saying, we're going to punish China 145%. Actually, on the White House website, they have said that it is 245%. Okay. And at that point, you're just simply going into absurdity, right? It's like those old AOL discs that offered you, 1,000 hours. It's like there's not enough time to do 1,000 hours. So anyway, it's moving into absurdity. But having said that, now they're exempting electronics. Well, I thought that you wanted to reshore manufacture. And surely electronics must be something, must be higher on your target of things to reshore. But if you've exempted that, you've done two things. One is you've signaled where your weakness is, what you can't do without. And clearly the US cannot do without electronics from China. I mean, the iPhone, Apple, would essentially, vanish if they had to pay those tariffs. And secondly, you're undercutting yourself. You're undermining. Are these tariffs really about reshoring? If not, you want to keep tariffs on, plastic toys, but you want to exempt electronics. So it doesn't make any sense. And it's that level of whipsawing stupidity, which the Chinese are simply sitting back and watching. And they're saying, we don't even have to get involved with this stupidity. They're saying, look, we're not even going to play that game because, to be honest, after 50% tariffs, you're not making any difference. Once tariffs hit about 50%, you're essentially decoupled on that front. And so raising it any higher doesn't make any sense. So they're sitting back. And in the meantime, the hedge fund managers and the people who really, corporate plutocrats who really pull the strings in the government are pulling out their hair. Not only is the stock market crashing, but the bond market is crashing, and the foreign exchange market is haywire. And so they're the ones who are yanking Trump's chain and saying, you need to get this straight. We cannot deal with this anymore. Ray Dalio says that this is going to be worse than a recession. The top hedge fund managers, quote unquote, the barons of industry and finance are saying you have to stop this nonsense right away. So that's what it is. California has started a lawsuit against Trump. They're saying you can't do this to us.
Wow. I mean, they've evaporated trillions over the course of just a few days. It's astonishing. And to make your point,
first 2 days, $10 trillion vanished.
and to make your point, Trump came out at one point, it was like, these sanctions are here to stay. And then a day later, dialed it back to like 10%. And you get Lutnick, who I still say is a lunatic. And I cannot believe that this is the front person for a lot of this stuff. When he's talking about the 145% tariffs, listen to what he says here, because he makes your point. This notion of we're gonna bring back manufacturing into the United States, and he's talking about specifically electronics.
Great American workers.
You
we are
said
going to
robots
replace
on other
the
networks. You said
armies
that's a
of
fact.
millions of people. Well, remember the army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones. That kind of thing is going to come to America. It's going to be automated, and great Americans, the trade craft of America, is going to fix them, is going to work on them. They're going to be mechanics. There's going to be HVAC specialists. There's going to be electricians. The trade craft of America are high school educated Americans. The core to our workforce is going to have the greatest resurgence of jobs in the history of America to work on these high-tech factories, which are all coming to America. That's what's going to.
And by the way, the party that is destroying the Department of Education and in no way is going to invest in any of those things that would make those industries even possible to be here for people to know how to do those things. Like, it's one thing if you say, okay, we're going to have a 10-year plan where we're going to invest in the American worker. We're going to put money into education. Maybe college is now free. Maybe, 2-year college is dealing with these things for free. We're going to give them. That's not what they're doing. That's not what they're doing at all. It's almost like he's waving a magic wand. Also, to back up another point you made, they dialed it back because of market forces. When they saw that treasury bonds were being sold and not bought, they freaked out. And they pulled his chain saying, hey, you got to stop. Like, you can't do this. You need to pull back. Meaning he didn't have the power to do what he thought that he could do. America didn't have the strength to do that. It's almost like the underlying details didn't really matter to Trump. He was just going in a direction purely for ideological reasons. And look, if this happened 50 years ago, God bless. This is not 50 years ago. And now you have to effectively deal with reality the way it is. I'm curious on something. I'm conflicted on the direction to go. Let me go in this direction first. You sent me a clip. There are a lot of people who are blaming China for this, which I think is whacked out. American oligarchs made a choice to do this in their minds, and it's a rational choice, right? From a standpoint of, if I'm an individual and I'm in control of a lot of capital, and I am the one in control of a particular company, and the modus operandi that we run with as capitalists is maximize profit. It is a rational act for me to pay politicians to allow me to ship jobs overseas and then import products where I don't necessarily have to pay much for those products to be imported. So Bob, who's making $20 an hour at a factory, now gets fired, and you send it over to China or the Philippines or Malaysia or wherever else. You pay the guy $3 an hour, and Bob has lost his job, but the guy at the top has made what, $12 extra? Let's say another $2 for imports. Okay, so you made $10 as opposed to what you were making before on your labor force. Okay, what does that look like over 50 years, where all of these guys get in their minds, this is a great way to maximize our profit? That's what they did. And so the notion that you're going to turn around and say, it's China's fault, it's outrageous. You sent me this clip, and I'm going to play this clip. It plays on Instagram, and this guy is 1000% correct in what he's saying here. And it's not like those oligarchs took that money and made America better. They made themselves better. Okay, why can't I hear you? Why can't I hear you? Oh, there we go.
And you thank them for it. That's a tragedy. That's a scam. That's why I'm saying this right now. Americans, you don't need a tariff. You need a revolution. For decades, your government and oligarchs who ship your job to China, not for diplomacy, not for peace, but to exploit cheap laborers. And in the process, they hollowed out your middle class, crushed your working class, and told you to be proud while they sold your future for profit. And yes, China made money, but we used it to build roads, lift millions out of poverty. On healthcare, raise living standard, we reinvested in our people. My family also benefited from it. What did your oligarchs do? They bought yachts, private jets, and mansions with golf course driveways. They manipulate the market, dodge tax, and poured billions into endless wars. And you get stagnated wages, crippling healthcare costs, cheap dopamine, debt, and flagged wave property made in China while they pick your pocket. For 40 years, both China and the United States benefit from the trade, the manufacturing, but only one of us use that wealth to build. This isn't China's fault. This is yours. You let this happen. You let the oligarchs feed you lies while they made you fat, poor, and addicted. Now they blame China for mess they made. I don't think so. I don't think you need another tariff. You need to wake up. You need to take your country back. I think you need a revolution.
The guy's right. He's right. Well, somebody in the chat said no last spoken. Give me your thoughts, KJ.
Well, he's absolutely right. When countries enter into trade, they're essentially looking as much as possible to trade equivalents, whatever is equivalent for them. So it's a mutual benefit. This is generally the idea, unless there are, external coercive conditions. I would actually argue that China had the, weaker hand when it was negotiating with the United States. So the United States certainly benefited, but to be more precise, it was U.S. oligarchs that benefited. They made out like bandits, and it was the greatest redistribution of wealth upwards, since the Gilded Age. So of course, you have the multi-billionaires, approaching trillionaires. You have all of these, incredible oligarchs and plutocrats. And in the meantime, during that same period of engagement with China, U.S. wages flatlined. U.S. purchasing power flatlined. In China, manufacturing wages went up 130-fold. The Chinese went from being dirt poor to being reasonably, comfortable. And so during that period, the wealth went to the people, both in terms of infrastructure, in terms of public goods, in terms of near universal healthcare, near universal free education, etc. They saw those benefits, and their society got better and better. And that guy, got his English studies because his family did well, and he was probably able to study English somewhere. Okay, so the benefits, that tide lifted all boats in China. In the United States, it was highly concentrated and went straight to the plutocratic class, who simply leveraged it to make more money, to get more tax exemptions, as he points out, to get more and more advantage, and to gain massive political power. And so that is the fundamental problem with this. Now, if I were to, nitpick with him, I would say that it's not that you let this happen, we the people let this happen. It was that they were bamboozled into thinking that it wasn't happening, that, Democrats and the Republicans, both parties, essentially ran a con job on them. And each time they said, it will be great, and, look at how, wonderful it's going to be. And of course, none of that trickled down. And then now they're starting to blame China for their venality, for their corruption, for their theft. They want to blame it on somebody else. The other piece of this, I think it's important to understand, is that, when corporations take their business abroad and they're in search of cheap labor, they're doing two things simultaneously. On the one hand, they're increasing massive profits because they have lower costs, global labor arbitrage and all that. And on the other hand, by removing jobs from the United States, you make people, the working class in the United States, more desperate and more willing to do jobs for for less money. And so it disciplines the working class in the United States at the same time that it generates super profits for them by offshoring overseas. And then once having disciplined the working class, you're going to get two types of people. You're going to get people who go along with the program and they take out credit and they're working 2-3 jobs. They can't make things work, but they're just running as hard as they can on that treadmill. So this is this is what a lot of people are doing, just running harder and harder on that treadmill while all the profit is being sucked out of their labor. And then you have other people who will fall through the cracks. And these people, when they fall through the cracks, one of two things will happen. They'll say, this system doesn't work for me. I'm going, they're screwing me over, and I'm going to do whatever it takes for me to get what I need. These are people that sociologists call social dynamite. These are people that will blow up the system, or at least fight back in some kind of fashion. And so then that's why you have the massive increase in policing in communities, especially in poor communities, this kind of boot heel of military type police repression that slams down on poor communities, and then the massive increase of the carceral system. Since that 50-year period, incarceration has increased 700%. And on the other hand, you have, people who become homeless and completely dispossessed. And then you have, crumbs thrown at them through the nonprofit industrial complex, which has also increased about 1,700%. So it's just an ugly system, and it screws everybody all around. On China's side, they said even under these unfavorable exploitative conditions, we can still do something and improve our country. But in the United States, simply because of the way that the government is structured, almost everybody got screwed except for the ruling plutocrat class.
And it's ideological in many respects. I mean, I forget who made the saying, freedom for who to do what. And they would say, well, this is a free country. Missing the point, you kind of have to be rich for it to be free. And so, but I think one of the biggest con jobs was this ability to kind of spread that out. I'll give you an example. When Jen Psaki, when the war started, and they started putting sanctions and everything else on Russian oil, and Psaki said, well, we have to pay for our values, that values are not without cost. And it's like, who's we? It's the we part, right? Where you give this impression that all of us have this belief set, and all of us are in it together, and all of us are prospering together. And I don't know, Mark Frost, when he would come on, he says the worst thing in the world for a capitalistic system is for people believing they don't have buy-in, that it doesn't work when you have more and more people feeling like they're falling through the cracks, and that it is not working in their interests, where they see other people getting ahead. They see a small minority getting ahead, but they themselves are kind of left out, where there is no we anymore. It's them and us. And look, I think the worst part in the world is that many people think that their failure is entirely their own. In some cases, it may be, right? But in many sense, you have a system that people are effectively functioning in. And they sometimes forget the fact that they're a fish in water. They're not a thing unto themselves. And so, if I have to pay X amount, $50,000 to get an education, okay, well, that's going to put a limit on the number of people who can get an education, when getting an education in a global market is paramount and is beneficial to your society. If I have to pay all of this money for healthcare, okay, I may go without healthcare. So, you're doing these things that are effectively detrimental to the person as opposed to uplifting human beings and allowing those human beings to be self-actualized. A different system doesn't have that. I mean, so you're absolutely right. I can't quibble with what you're saying. One last question before I let you go. Why does China believe these sanctions are in play? And I'm fascinated by this question because in Russia, there's a belief that the sanctions are being done to decouple the United States from China with the idea of a war. Now, in other respects, there are people who look at it from an economic saying, well, Donald Trump is stuck in he's an 80-year-old man stuck in the 50s or stuck in the 60s. And in his mind, we need to get back an industrial base in the way that we had it back in the 50s and 40s and 60s or whatever. There is an interesting poll where they asked people, would the United States be better as an industrial country? I think like 80% said yes. And then they say, how many of you would like to work in a factory? And it was like 20%. Yes. So it's like, okay, we're for factories as long as somebody else is doing the work in the factories. Okay, I don't know how that works, right? But what does China, how do they view it? Are they viewing this decoupling as, okay, Donald Trump is trying to flex economic might in order to get economic advantage? Are they looking at it as Donald Trump is trying to decouple from China in order to go to some kind of actual hot conflict? How does China view what Donald Trump is doing with this?
China hasn't, released any official position on this, but I think I would say all of the above. I think they see it as part of ongoing hybrid war against China, starting with, the 2011 pivot to Asia. That was really the beginning of this. This is the beginning of a declaration of war. And I would argue that we are already, in some sense, at the beginnings of a global world war, starting with Russia and many other conflagrations. And it's just continually building up. And so then these tariffs and sanctions make sense in that they're a kind of decoupling in preparation for war. And I think Brian Berletic has made that point on several occasions. I think that he's not wrong on that. So on the one hand, you can see it as hybrid war or the pre-kinetic phase of a continuous ongoing project of war against China. And the decoupling is part of that. And I want to point out that, originally the plan when the US engaged with China was to absorb it and do a Soviet Union on it. When that didn't work in 2008, the global financial system collapsed. China was supposed to be this Potemkin state that was going to collapse of its own accord. And then the US would simply, rush in and pick out, like vultures, they would, pick out, the fat of the carcass for themselves. It didn't collapse. Instead, the global Western financial capitalist system, the financial system, collapsed. And China was actually the strongest of the bunch. And that's when they realized that, oh, okay, China is not going to become absorbed as a vassal into the US neoliberal system. It's not going to collapse of its own accord. We need to give it a little push down the stairs. And that's when Barack Obama declared the pivot to Asia. This was an explicit plan of war. It came with a doctrine of war called air-sea battle, that they drafted since about 2009, 2008. And so these war plans go back a very, very long way. And Trump has simply kind of tacked left and right, shifted some of the tactics and shifted it from the terrain of a generalized hybrid war into a more focused tariff war, because that's what he loves. He loves tariffs. What he forgets is that if tariffs are nice for him, maybe they might be nice for other people too. Two can play that game. It's like that Mike Tyson, quote, everybody has a plan until, their yes, their jaw hits my fist. This is the problem with the US ruling elite, is that they can't think ahead. Once again, it's that chess analogy. It's like you play with a beginning chess player and they don't understand that you actually have a counter strategy. And they're astonished when you start taking their pieces. It's like, you can't do that. How can you do that? Well, you have to understand that if you have a plan, the other side has a plan too. And there is going to be a counter strategy. Now, the US has been very good. It's been actually very, very skilled in kind of this domestic process of exploiting and undermining its people. You mentioned, for example, the $50,000 tuition, and in some cases closer to $100,000. Why would you, if you're trying to develop your country, why would you put that kind of burden on the development of your, cognitive workers? The reason for that is that if you saddle with them with that burden, it keeps them in line. You put that yoke on them from the moment that they are an adult. At the moment they're 18, they're going to be saddled with tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt. Well, what that does is that it keeps them from doing anything other than looking for a career that will generate them money so that they can pay off this debt. In other words, once again, it's a way of disciplining and controlling society, especially youth, because youth are the people that often rise up and try and change the system. You've disciplined the university because, the challenge to society has often come from the university. Once you saddle young people with that kind of debt, they can't look anywhere but towards, a career of making as much money as fast as possible. So this is deliberate. This is a deliberate saddling of young people with debt in order to control them, in order to profit from them, certainly, but in order to keep them from having other ideas, in order to keep them from challenging society, as they did en masse in the 1960s. 1968, students almost, changed the entire global system. So it's a way of controlling and manipulating and dominating and repressing, the kind of inherent justice-oriented impulses, I believe, of young people. And of course, we're fed this lie, as you point out, that if we don't make it and are not successful in this society, then it's our fault, right? This is what Steinbeck said. Everybody in the United States is a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, right? Or a temporarily embarrassed billionaire now, for accounting for inflation. But this notion that, we're just like one step or one hack or one little project away from being financially independent and successful, you just have to work harder. This is the ideology, this is the lie that is told us. And the opposite side of that is that if you fail, it is your fault. It's not that you have been screwed over 50 ways to Tuesday. It's that there's something in you that was wrong, that you didn't try hard enough. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't hack your, neurocognitive capacities well enough or something like that. But it is your fault. But it always comes back down to the individual. And this is the kind of core ideology that traps people and keeps them from making change. You see, the word individualism doesn't exist in the English language until around the 1750s. Okay, it's a new word. And it used to always be prefaced with the modifier economic individualism. What is economic individualism? It's a euphemism for capitalism. So the rise of individualism is also the rise of capitalism. They go hand in hand. And the reason for that is that capitalism is a predatory system. It exploits people. It preys on people. And like the predator has to force the herd to scatter and to individualize themselves in order to take advantage of them. And so in a predatory system, you want individualization. You want that fragmentation. You want that dispersion. You want that individualized, weakness. And so this is why we're so fed this gospel of individualism. But, it's a bill of goods, and it's the reason why we are exploited. And so when that person says, you let this happen, he means you as an individual didn't fight back, because the fact is that as individuals, you cannot fight back against this machinery. What you have to do is you have to build solidarity in many, many different forms. You have to find and build solidarity in order to challenge and change this type of exploitative system.
Yeah, and for that, you have to have people who can buck the ideology that is continuously thrust upon them, meaning it's constant. It's like you would have people even arguing, well, I had to pay for school, so kids shouldn't be able to get free college. Or I have to pay for this, so kids shouldn't get, or people shouldn't get health care. Or we don't believe that people should get Medicaid. They are trying to take nearly $1 trillion of Medicaid. And mind you, I can tell you the US healthcare system is, if you go anywhere else in the world, and they would say, we don't, I've had to get treatments in various countries. I think I've gotten, been in more hospitals in more countries than anybody else in the world. And often they would say, why on earth does the US healthcare system function the way that it does? It makes no sense. And only thing I can do is shrug and say, you're absolutely right. Like when I go to, I can give you an example. And I'll let you go after this because I have another interview that I have to get to. And there's one other question I wanted to ask on treasuries. I was in Egypt. I was in Cairo. And I'm sitting there waiting for the treatment to start. And this Egyptian guy comes out. And he's smoking. He's like, would you like a cigarette? Take a cigarette. And we're sitting there smoking in the hospital. And he asks me, he says, how much do you have to pay for this? And I tell him, and he says, my country pays for this for free. He was German citizen. I think he's like German Egyptian or something. He's there for medical treatment. And he's effectively saying, well, the German government and the healthcare system pays for it if you go to other countries, because from their point of view, if you get healthcare in Germany or somewhere else, you still healthcare, same difference. If I leave the US, then I leave the US. And even in the context of being in the US, the amount that you pay for it is astronomical in comparison to what you would pay for it elsewhere. I was in Israel and I had to get medication in Israel. And I remember going to buy it, thinking to myself, oh my God, this is going to hurt. I don't have insurance in Israel, obviously. It was less than I was paying for it in the States with insurance, or about equal to what I was paying for it with insurance. That's astonishing. And most Americans don't know that. From their point of view, this is just the way the world is. Not realizing that there's a system being imposed upon you that is making it that way. It's not magic. It didn't just happen that way. Those profits are being extracted on something that you effectively can't live without. One last question, KJ, before I let you go. You're utterly awesome. Treasuries. Apparently, Donald Trump is looking for the country that is releasing a lot of U.S. treasuries. Is that China? You're shaking your head. I'm taking that as a yes.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm asking you, is that China?
Well, I mean, there's a huge problem with treasuries because treasuries, as you know, is what people go to in times when the stock market is turbulent. People shift to bonds because these are often corporate, but often sovereign debt. You can buy sovereign debt. Right. And when T-bills go up, it means that when the interest rate goes up, it means the price is going down. And it means a loss of confidence, a loss of long-term confidence in the country. It means that they consider the US no longer to be a worthy creditor. And if you understand that, the T-bill and the US currency is the foundation of the global financial system, when investors send that message, they're sending a message directly, to the United States. Your country is no longer credible. Your credit is no longer something we can trust. And remember, credit.
You're okay.
Yeah, I apologize. I have to plug.
No, you're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine.
Otherwise, I'm going to lose electricity juice. But it's like your credit. Credit means I believe you, right? It comes from Latin, credere. It means to believe. And when people give you credit, it means they trust you. It means they believe you. And when they don't trust your credit, it means they don't trust you anymore. So there's a foundational crisis of confidence in the United States itself that is manifesting in these markets. And not a surprise. I mean, we've seen this coming for decades. But as you point out, once again, it goes back to a system that is based on grift and exploitation and fraud. That, you know, like when you go for that medical treatment, you are paying, you know, a ridiculous markup, and all that profit is just being extracted straight up to the top, to the, you know, to the executives, while you, the U.S., you know, a client, the medical client, you know, is paying through the nose. We have the most expensive medical system in the world with the worst outcomes of the OECD. And this grift is ongoing. It's an ongoing grift. You know, just, you know, from my experience and other people's experience, people I know around me, you know, every time you go to the doctor, or especially if you call for, you know, an ambulance, it feels like you're getting mugged, right? I mean, it's literally a mugging. I mean, it's a you know, authorized mugging. It's a legalized mugging, but you're getting mugged. You know, you go to the ambulance. I had a friend who took an ambulance. They gave her a baby aspirin on the way, just as a precautionary measure. They charged her $30 for that baby aspirin, right? Like, why is that even legal? Why is that even you know, why is that tolerated? But this kind of incredible markup is what we're subjected to all the time, because the grifters have control over the system. They're making windfall profits of it. And now what's interesting right now is you are starting to see some of that break down. I mean, this is a separate topic, but connected, is TikTokers are now showing that, you know, that luxury handbag that you're paying $38,000 for is only worth, you know, like $600 or $1,300. I mean, it's like a 90-something% markup. Wait for this. I think that we're going to see the same thing with pharmaceuticals, right? You're going to see TikTokers who say, you know, you're paying, you know, $5,000 for that drug. Hey, you know, it's only worth, you know, $5, you know, etc. So I think
I want to pin you down on this before I let you go. It's China, one of the countries, because correct me if I'm wrong, China has a lot of U.S. debt. And as you say, you know, we exchange money for goods. And so, you know, from my understanding, they have an obscene amount of, like, hundreds of billions of dollars. Are they the country that's releasing it? I mean, I would imagine other countries may be releasing it too if they are losing confidence. But if China has a lot of the treasury notes, and we're looking for, okay, where's this coming from? Because apparently they were freaked out by the fact that A, they weren't being bought, and B, they were being released. And from my understanding, they couldn't necessarily delineate who was releasing them. I would imagine why wouldn't it be China?
You know, as far as we know, it was actually Japan. Now, you're right. You know, treasuries are traded over the counter. And so there's no centralized exchange where you can keep track of who's selling what and how much. But we think, as best as we know, that these were actually Japanese banks that were dumping U.S. treasuries.
Interesting. Because their market is getting hammered right now. I mean, like they're talking about like cutting interest rates, all sorts of stuff from the thing. KJ, you are fantastic. We had a massive crowd. I think we got up to like 770 people, if not more. To be fair, we had a damn good show today, but you topped it off, going towards the end, leaving and ending strong. Thank you for this, man. The audience loves you. I love you on the show. We deeply appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
You have a good one. And just to be clear, KJ, no, I always want to tell people where you are. Journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher, specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region, contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is available at iacenter.org. KJ, you have a show that is coming out. Please tell people where they can find it and what the show is.
It just came out yesterday. It's called The China Report on YouTube. It's part of the Breakthrough News Network. And I discuss with Ben Norton the tariffs.
You have a good one, my man. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Have a good one. All right. KJ is fantastic. learn something from him every time he comes on the show. His understanding of this stuff is great. The way he explains it is fantastic. Love the guy. And the audience, obviously, responds very well to him. KJ No should be a U.S. ambassador to China. He's good, right? He knows his stuff. Yeah, he knows his stuff. The China Report. Definitely check him out. Let me go to the chat because I have an interview coming up in 15 minutes with a gentleman on Twitter known as the Iran, I think, Spectre. He has a huge following on Twitter. He does not want his identity to be known. So I need to find some way to do that interview where I don't necessarily disclose his identity. Interviews like that usually are not great because people want to know who they're talking to. Like, this is the Dick Cheney problem, right? Where Dick Cheney is talking to the New York Times as an anonymous source, and then Dick Cheney goes back and references the anonymous source that was him as if he was some random person in the government. So there's always an issue with it. But he has a big following on Twitter. I was having a conversation with him behind the scenes about the negotiations with Witkoff in Iran. And he has an interesting take on it. And his point of view is Witkoff is being played. That's his take. That all things being equal, the last thing Iran wants is war. So obviously, Iran is in contact with China and Russia in regards to how they are handling this. So they're not in it alone in the way that they were when they were doing the JCPOA, where Iran was on some level isolated. When I say that the Ukraine war changed the context of the world, I mean that in literal terms. Think back, the first Trump administration, Iran was, for the most part, isolated. North Korea, somewhat isolated. Russia wasn't making moves in the way that it's making moves. Okay, well, fast forward. You've sanctioned the country to like 25,000 or some obscene amount. They start going around the world to make allies and friends. Iran, China, India, Brazil, South Africa. You have Indonesia that seems to want to be joining, want to join. UAE has joined. Saudi Arabia is this kind of partner thing that dances back and forth, but still somewhat of a buddy. The US has effectively alienated much of the world even before Donald Trump got into office. Like, this is a new norm that we didn't necessarily have before. And so this is not an Iran that is by themselves dealing with a Goliath. This is an Iran that is working with allies as the US is in a fight with Russia, is in a trade war with China, and is threatening to bomb Iran. So obviously, these countries have an interest in working together in their thinking process and how they deal with the US on all of these foreign policy issues. The US is bumping up against a block in this way. It's fascinating when you think about it. The fact that they lost that war and losing that war in Ukraine, whatever deal Witkoff comes up with, is fascinating. Either he's being played or there's an actual grand bargain that could be made where Ukraine is a small part of a larger bargain. I've also seen reporting where Trump, or let's say the US and Russia, are thinking about an intermediary government for Ukraine, basically somehow getting rid of Zelensky and putting in somebody that they can effectively work with as a choice of both, except I need to find an article. I have it somewhere. I guess my point is the world is changing. These are tipping points that I think even Alex Krainer owned up to the fact that you see the stuff in hindsight. You know, you look back and say, oh, that. I'm trying to point to it now as it's happening. The notion that we go all in a war like this, and you can only go so far because after a while you're going to end up in a nuclear war. But you go all in. You get Europe to go all in. And you have an organization that's been around for like 50 years with the entire purpose of the organization to go after the Soviet Union. Russia is not the Soviet Union. It's a remnant of the Soviet Union. And yet NATO is still aimed against this remnant. The Warsaw Pact countries dissipate. NATO remains. and they finally get the war that they've been chomping at the bit for, that they've been preparing for, that the entire basis of the organization was set up for, and they lose. Okay, well, what does that mean? It means something, right? And now you have a China that is not submissive. This is not opium wars. This is not gunboat diplomacy where you can force open the gates. This is not 20, 30 years ago where they would accept this browbeating from the US. Their point of view is, we are not accepting this. You're not the boss of us. And if we're going into an economic war, we have been around for 5,000 years. We will remain regardless of what happens in this. This is a fight for economic supremacy. And the fact that Trump had to back down because of the way the markets are acting in the US on some point gets across a weakness and inability to articulate power that he thought he actually had. The fact that he had to pull back on the electronics gets across a weakness for power that he thought he actually had. What did I say? Power is a shadow on the wall, but the moment you have to actually put it into kinetic practice, that's when you're taking the gamble. That's when you have to actually show that you could do what you project that you can do. And in the case of Ukraine, they failed. He's now in the economic sense. Will he be able to do it? Will China back down? Will China give him a phone call? Or will it be Trump that makes that phone call? Or will it be something even worse, where the US takes a hit as a direct result of not being able to keep up in a war of the sorts? These are fascinating questions, and these things are effectively happening as we speak. Now, if Witkoff can make a deal with Russia on some grand sense, where there's these kind of economic ties that, let's say, creates a new security architecture of Europe based on some kind of economic cooperation between the United States and Russia, where the big superpowers finally say, all right, we buried the hatchet. New norm going forward. Now, that may not last into the next administration, but the fact that he's trying to do it, if indeed Witkoff is right, is pretty amazing. And I support it, by the way, if they're able to create this relationship, because I don't see the reason why these guys are fighting. I understand the history of it, but this is ideology. This is not necessarily reality. We're not talking about a communist country. We're talking about a capitalist country at this point. I have studied, I studied chess, like in the way people study physics when I was a kid. And what you find yourself is you're reading Russian writers, Botnev, Tao, Petrosian, I can't think of some of the other names. It ingratiates you in a way where you don't have this reflexive ideological hatred towards a group because of historical context. I'm not going to be a slave or prisoner of history in this. I want a better world. And part of having a better world is being able to have relationships with other countries. And if they can do this in a way that makes sense, God bless. Yeah, I'll stop it there because I have to get to the thing. But just Pyrite, please look into Esther Project 2025. I don't know what that is. I would look into it. 2025. And the last one, Ronald Spastic Polywag Show. Fantastic name. Fantastic name. The thing I find to be hypnotical about Western countries is that the United States continually launches wars of aggression, and none of them have anything to say about it, as if it's cool and normal. There's usually a fair amount of propaganda that goes into justifying a war. So in Iraq, there's weapons of mass destruction. In Yemen, they're, stopping the Red Sea. Oftentimes these things are lies, by the way. In fact, all of them have been lies up to this point. Even the Vietnam War, the Spanish-American War, all of these things were effectively started on false premises. The public, as long as the public is fat, has an Xbox, has a woman to sleep with, they usually shut up and go along with it. You're right. You're right. Even the Ukraine thing, $300 billion into that war, $200 billion, how much ever, while simultaneously telling people, I'm sorry, we can't pay for your education. Sorry, you have to pay this much for healthcare. Sorry, your rent is this high. Sorry, your grocery bills are this high. Meaning deprivation on the home front while having billions to spend. We spent $10 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq. $10 trillion just of debt. And you think to yourself, you could be high-speed rail, you could send things to Mars, you could get rid of homelessness. Like, you think of all the things that you could do with that much money, and it was effectively burned on the White House lawn. I agree with you, 1,000%. Which track villains group operates like the American power structure the most? Oh, that's a tough one. I have to think about that one. I want to say the Cardassians, but I don't know if that's true. The Cardassians had an authoritarian state, like a rigid authoritarian state. Similar in, yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. I don't know. Got to think about that one. All right. I'm going to end this because I'm going to be running late. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. I want to thank all of you for joining me. We had a fantastic show today. All of the guests were great. Our numbers were through the roof. Yeah, we're growing. We're almost at 50K. And you can see that growth just in the numbers for the show. At some point, we're going to hit 1,000 people each show. And at some point, 2,000, 3,000, et cetera, et cetera. And we did this on our own, just us. I started with 0. I didn't start on TYT or any of these other groups. Started alone. I did it on my own. Of course, I had support. My mom, for example, in the crowd, she's cheering the crowd up. My ex used to help me cut clips. And she attempted to help me book guests. That was a little bit more complicated. My ex-wife, even she used to be supportive, even though the show was considered to be the other woman. Because I'll be doing like 2 a.m. I appreciate all of you. And I thank you for joining me, especially going on this early in the morning, especially after hiatus with the radio show and everything else. You have my deep appreciation, earnestly. You guys have a fantastic evening, and I'll see you guys bright and early, 7 a.m. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, signing off.